putting that onto the web at some point, so just so you know that.
Can I formally object to the fact the camera's pointing to my bald spot at the back this time? But
which one?
Yeah, you are right. Thanks, Richard.
Okay.
That kind of meeting, isn't it?
Okay. Right. We have quite a long agenda, so we'll get going. Thank you. First of all, we have apologies for non-attendance. Did you want to?
Through you, Chairman, we have apologies for non-attendance from Councillors King and Larratt from Northampton Borough Council, and also from Northampton Borough Council, Councillor Eales, with Councillor Stone substituting.
Thank you very much. Okay. Do we have a notification of requests to members of the public to address the meeting, James?
No requests received, Chair.
Okay. So, declaration of members' interests. Members are reminded that they should declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest in items on the agenda that are not already listed on the register of interest. Council members are subject to the requirements of their own authority's code of conduct, and independent members are subject to the host's authority's code of conduct. Members are reminded if they have a DPI or significant NSDI to be discussed, whether it's registered or not, they must not take part in the debate or vote on that matter and should remove themselves from the room irrespective of whether they're a member of the panel. Okay. Next item is Chairman's announcements. First of all, I'd like to welcome Janet Keeley here on my left. She's the Deputy Monitoring Officer, and she's stepping in for Susan Zeiss for this meeting. Have a number of other announcements. The Home Office are doing a review of the way PCCs and panels work. So they sent out a broadcast request to ask for people if they were willing to talk to them, and I said yes. So they came to Northampton, and I had a very interesting interview. They asked a lot of standard questions like how the panel works, how we decide our work plan, etc. And I was able to answer those, obviously, but I was able to get in a little bit of lobbying, so about the poor funding position of Northants, view of the expanding population, and place in the country as well, meaning we suffer from county lines and gangs, and he's very sympathetic. And I explained the role of the members of the PCP and saying that particularly with the fire service expansion, it was growing, and although we don't know the full implications of that yet, that it is a growing job. In other areas they have fire authorities and members receiving considerable allowances, and yet you have the PCP expected to do this all as well as their current workload and no allowances at all. And I explained some of the work that I've been doing over the last year to illustrate the sort of workload. And I also put in a bid that the PCP doesn't have sufficient powers, particularly with regards to complaints. And also spoke to him about the Home Office being less than helpful to support the new National Association of Police, Fire and Crime Panels, because to do with the funding of that, because that's a mechanism that we see of improving the work of panels, and they're being rather stubborn about their funding. And I also went to the national conference in November. That was very interesting. Attended a workshop on fire governance and another doing more in-depth scrutiny. And although that was interesting, in a way it's really scrutiny of the police they were doing rather than the PCC. And so that could be seen to exceed our role. And to suddenly say, oh, we need to have lots of extra meetings, I thought would put a lot of pressure on democratic services, so it's not something I would advocate at the moment. So as I say, the Home Office are causing us some problems with National Association of Police and Crime Panels, so I have also written to the Minister of State for Policing, along with other panel chairs, to request that they be a bit more flexible on the use of our funding. And I'd just like to remind panel members, I'm sure you've will know this anyway, is that as we have got the 2 confirmation hearings at the end, we obviously need to keep our comments succinct so we can fit that in a reasonable time frame. So that's all I have to say for now. Next item is the minutes of the Police and Crime Panel meeting held on the 27th of September. Everyone's had a copy of that. Are there any... I don't particularly want to go through each page saying, you know, is this accurate, but are there any sort of inaccuracies? Oh, sorry.
There's a correction on the first page, Chairman. We've unfortunately misspelled Councillor Eales' first name. That should be Terry with an IE rather than just an I.
Okay.
So that needs to be amended.
Of course. Are there any other corrections that, or inaccuracies or comments that people would like to make on any of the items, the minutes up to page 15? None?
So happy to...
Okay. Happy to agree. I'll sign that. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. On the on those minutes, it did mention about the multi-force shared services, and I just wonder whether maybe the PCC would like to tell us how they're going to handle the back office for the fire service. Is that going to go through LGSS as currently, or is that going to go through their MFSS?
I'm quite happy to talk to that right now. So multi-force share services, because there's some new members in it, is if I say a collaboration between Nottingham, Civil Nuclear, Cheshire and Northamptonshire Police. At this moment in time, it's in the middle of introducing a new ERP system, Oracle Fusion. As some of you have worked at the County Council, you know how interesting implementing a new ERP system is. And so there is an important change programme going on there. One of my most critical starts as the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner was to ensure all of our firefighters are paid. So we will be, and we have contracted with LGSS for the next 18 months to provide some certainty both to them and to also ensure that we can onboard them at an appropriate point. Subject to MFSS delivering on Oracle Fusion, it would be obviously our longer term plan to probably move on, but that's not a decision we've made yet. We need to make sure. I've got some reviews going on around MFSS that I want to see complete before we would take that. But MFSS is in the middle also of onboarding Cheshire Fire. So actually those lessons, if you like, are ones I would like to... I never quite like to be first. I like someone else to make the mistakes first so that I have the opportunity to learn from them. So if you like, we're going to use LGSS. My learned colleague here is in some... We'll be taking, I think we're taking a person out of them from finance to make sure our own statutory obligations around finance are met, rather than leave that in there. But fundamentally, from a payroll point of view, we'll be staying in LGSS. The last thing I need is not to pay firefighters in my first month. It's just one of those risks I didn't really want to take.
Thank you very much. That's very, very useful. Okay. Right. I have a couple of matters arising from that. There was resolution 14/18A on page 9. Did you want to mention what it was, James? I think it was the PCC has some clarification.
Certainly,
for us.
Chair. So at the last meeting, under discussion of it was the Police and Crime Plan delivery update. The delivery update included a sentence that overall 17.8% of crimes are resolved, and Northamptonshire Police are a regional leader in the use of domestic violence protection orders. The panel sought clarification of what exactly was meant by the term resolved in that case.
Happy to answer that. And I will read from this so I get it exactly right. In old terms, this used to be a term as detected. In simple terms, it means there was some form of positive outcome in relation to an investigation following a criminal allegation. So, for example, this could be a charge or prosecution, offences taken into consideration, caution or conditional caution. Not all of these are solely relevant for domestic abuse, but give you a sense of what it means.
Thank you very much. And the item B, we have now had a paper on the Operation Viper, so thank you very much for sending that through.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Yep.
I think that answers an obvious question. Is the breakdown is actually quite important to the public with regard to resolve. I think we broadly understood what resolve would mean, and there are no surprises there. But it is important that we understand, especially with domestic violence, how many are being charged, and et cetera, et cetera. Now, I'm just wondering, as we are all about public confidence, if we ever have that again, that we have the breakdown to understand the proportions with regard to the resolution.
Can I come back, Madam Chairman?
Yes, sir.
As many of you that sat around the table have just come from Voice at our victim service where we formally opened it. Obviously, some of you weren't in the room, but when one of the discussions I had with the judges around Sunflower, one area of particular concern to me, which I've just written to the Lord Chancellor on, is related to the failure rate of domestic violence cases here in Northamptonshire. The time it's taking to get those cases to court is having a very detrimental effect on the outcome. Why is that? We've got a case, and I think it's nearly 3 years that it's taken to get that to prosecution through the criminal justice here in Northamptonshire. If you have been a victim of domestic violence, potentially having to wait that long time means that people, just don't want to go through with it. They get tired, and actually, sadly, because of the length of outcomes, it's encouraging the defence to not plead guilty, whereas actually, if there was swifter justice. Now, the good news is that something's being done about it, and in early next year there will be a fast track court. Building on some of the work that's been done around the other country. And an example of that actually Judge Mayo had just used was in Richard's old stomping ground down in Aylesbury. They had actually the judge had been putting them through in 3 weeks. Now, what that means is that between the actual prosecutions as a consequence of pleading guilty go up significantly because there's actually swifter, more secure justice. So that's something that's being delivered here. But at this moment in time, the outcomes for domestic violence, which we're able to very carefully monitor through Voice, quite frankly, have been wholly unacceptable. So actually, we've got charged. That is only the police end of it. The actual outcomes for victims has been wholly unacceptable. And now with the new system that we put in at Voice, we're more able to better understand it and go back to criminal justice with harder data, which we've been doing.
Thank you. Mary, I think you had one.
Very quick, just to say that I would like to see more specifics as regards to domestic violence and what we're dealing with. And one of the main reasons, that's what we discussed last week, Stephen, is that I've had a meeting with Anne Bosworth, and they're really fighting hard to keep funding for refuge. But at the moment, we're looking at March closure across Northamptonshire. So if they've got more facts and figures that they can address when they're going to get money, we can actually prove the needs of keeping these services within Northamptonshire, because we're on the verge of losing them. And I think it'd be really important if we could drill down to that and give that information to the likes of Sunflower Centre and to the likes of Women's Aid, who are actually actively fighting at the moment. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Laura, you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. You're not on. You're not on.
that me and Mary were on a drinking session. We met in Morrison's, where myself and the chief were doing one of our engagement days, where actually we're talking and hearing directly from the public. Mary come and took a lot of my time up. You know I mean that with love. I think what would probably be useful, if it's helpful for you, is I will bring back a report to you on our response around domestic violence, because there are some challenges, not least around, also you mentioned sunflower, its security and stuff like that, the uncertainty at the county council. I'll bring you, if you like, a state of the nation, and we can talk about it. We might not be able to do it next time, because sure, we're going to get into precepts, but we'll get it in the next 2 meetings.
Okay. Laura, sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. It is not a question so much, it is a point of clarification for me, and I do apologise, it is my first crime panel meeting. If I may refer to page 5 of the previous minutes. It says at the bottom that Councillor Roy was the second substitute. If I now go over to page 3, it does not say, she's clearly reflected there in place of Councillor Strachen. I do not see Councillor Stone reflected in there, so I'm asking, is she a member of the panel?
Yeah.
So, Councillor Strachan is one of the 2 representatives from Northamptonshire County Council on the panel, and as you quite rightly pointed out, Councillor Roy is now his substitute. Councillor Stone is present today substituting for Councillor Eales, who's one of the 2 Northampton Borough Council representatives on the panel. It adds complexity that 2 of the authorities have 2 representatives, the other 6 have 1. You're correct also in pointing out that the agenda doesn't list Councillor Stone as the substitute for Councillor Eales. The local authorities who are members of the panel can change their substitutes or indeed their members at any time using the standard of processes that apply to appointments to committees. So if I'm advised that Northampton Borough Council have changed their substitute from Councillor Birch to Councillor Stone, then that is the situation.
Thank you.
Okay. Richard.
Thank you, Chair. It's just to try and round off this domestic violence. I think it's probably weighing on our minds, having just come from where we've come from. And something that Councillor Butcher said, there doesn't appear to be a Northamptonshire domestic violence policy. Now, I understand that your office is responsible for leading that. And my issue is there are so many strands to deal with domestic violence. If this, I don't think historically we've ever really gripped this up. And looking back at my years of public service. But we have many strands to deal with domestic violence, from the preventative to dealing with the victims, to the prosecution of offenders, for dealing with the perpetrators, etc., etc. And we need to have this all joined up. We cannot have one refuge closing here and another refuge opening over here when there isn't one overall coordinated plan involving the National Health Service, the local councils, the police, the judiciary, whatever. Can you give us some reassurance that somebody is gripping this up and there is going to be an overall Northamptonshire strategy to tie all these things together so we don't lose the valuable strands that help deal with this sort of odious crime which is responsible for numerous homicides and is within our gift to sort out?
Oh, I'm glad you're giving me the opportunity to say that. The first one I would just to kind of emphasise, you mentioned in there in terms of refuge. 2 years ago, I chose to backstop it because nobody would. I mean, we got fortunate. We actually picked up a national one that meant I didn't need to. We didn't know that at the time. This last year we were okay, but there's been some real challenges around some authorities. Particularly yours has been one at times that has denied that domestic violence occurs in Daventry. I would hope you would go back and communicate with some of your fellow councillors to the challenge that comes with it. Sadly, it's not a statutory obligation for anyone, and that's actually the problem here. I would be very happy for it to be, if you like, made ours and us so we've used our convening powers, if you like, to make sure that we're seeking to address it. And we put quite a lot of money, and we will be, as I bring forward the paper, we'll tell you what we're doing, and we perhaps could have a debate on it. Because I think there's some, there are some very real risks that this also gets lost, this kind of level of detail, with the debate about the 2 unitaries, to make sure it actually is addressed. But we do need refuge provision, but actually done smartly, refuge provision technically could probably be paid with housing money anyway, because actually around the people in terms of rights. So there are which I'm just using to highlight, not trying to pass it on, that actually there are pots of money that people have access to that then could make those provisions available. But we absolutely, everybody needs to lean in.
I've got a lot of people wanting to speak at the moment. I think, Danielle, you were first.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
I think you haven't turned your mic on, though.
It is really worrying.
Sorry.
It is really worrying that out of 61 authorities that applied for the latest round of funding, we were the only ones that didn't get funding for refuge. So I'm really bothered about that, because the risk is that we're going to lose 39 beds over the county, which in itself hasn't been enough anyway. So and I do think a part of that was that lack of having a county-wide strategy. So I do think that's quite urgent. But the question I wanted to ask is, when we're looking at domestic violence, do we also register which cases are about sexual violence and which contexts also involve children? From my point of view, it's really important to understand that, so we know exactly what the issues are that we're dealing with.
Yes. Yes, and that's why I think I'll bring together a fuller briefing for you, because there's some amazing work that you'll hear that goes on. Northamptonshire Police has taken a very proactive, for instance, around Clare's Law. So actually, in terms of disclosing to people actually where someone is, even if they don't want to know that and they might not currently be a victim of domestic violence, but you might have a situation where people have, in a relationship with, if you like, a serial abuser, that we give them an informed piece of information. And obviously we do record where the sexual violence is involved, particularly through the Sunflower and our other systems. But also we are very proactive, to the point that one of the, I think it was a 25-year-old, had gone, if you like, used dating apps. He actually chose to leave the county because actually he was having trouble holding down a girlfriend, because the police were very active in terms of telling him some of his history. So there is, but I think actually it's probably worth, and we've also got a pilot. I don't think we've got it in now. Have we had it? We haven't had it confirmed yet. So part of the reason I'm playing for time, I'm hoping to have some very exciting news around some conditional cautions here in Northamptonshire as part of a pilot, which I'm hoping to come back and tell you about. And I think that will give the teeth that we need to help bring some of this stuff together.
It sounds to me as though we need to have an item on an agenda, a future agenda, to deal with this problem, and to go into it in a bit more deeply, and if then Stephen could give us those facts and figures, etc. I've got nearly everyone wanting to speak now, so I think, Laura, you were next.
Thank you. We saw obviously this morning when you were present, when the Police and Crime Commissioner was present as well. We had presentations from various services, and whereas I fully appreciate and commend the work that the Sunflower Centre is doing together with the police, it unfortunately only captures the high-risk domestic violence victims, and I'm missing the answer that Councillor Auger was obviously waiting for as well. When is the actual strategy going to be live, which is, we believe, in the hands of your office, and to ensure that not just the high-risk people, high-risk victims are being captured, but also what is classed as medium, as lower risk, because any victim of domestic or sexual violence is a high risk to anybody. It is not just about the perpetrator being captured. So I would appreciate if you could clarify that for me.
I never like to disagree with my panel members, but I do particularly want on this. Domestic violence is everybody's responsibility. It's both councillors and ours. I take mine very seriously, and it is part of the police and crime plan for us to address. There are a number of very serious activities that I will take you through next time that we already do, but I think what you're about to see is that we're moving it to a higher level. But I wouldn't want anyone to walk away with the impression that it's not taken very seriously. Northamptonshire, I invested last year extra money in our DAPIT, which is an actual domestic abuse, I can remember the darn perpetrator investigation team. So actually there is a lot of work that does on it, and I would, Madam Chairman, love the opportunity to present some of that work and what we'll do next time with it. But I would just remind you, it's actually everybody's responsibility. It's not just the OPCC and the police.
Okay, Ian, I think you were next. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I mean, to pick up on what Stephen has said and Richard has said, I think going forward this is an ideal opportunity with, we're looking at potentially two new unitary councils in the county. I think it's important, many of us around these tables are councillors. We should feedback this to our authorities locally, and this needs to be part of the mix in the two new unitary councils going forward. And we should encourage both of the new unitary councils to feed in with Stephen at the PCC and the police, and we should drive this forward. This is just so important that we get this right.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I don't think you need to answer that, Stephen. Mary, I think you were next, and then
yeah, mine is just very quick.
Yeah, sorry, Mary was waited a while. Yeah.
Mine is just very quick. I've actually discussed this with you anyway, Stephen. Is that there's a mindset that goes on in this county, and the mindset is that nobody seems to be responsible for safeguarding, and everybody's saying, well, that's not our job because that's county's job. Well, county is disappearing, as we all know. Sorry, James, but it is. Everybody, every single elected member that sits around this table, and yourselves from the PCC, we are all responsible for safeguarding. And that's where the mindset, I suggest, Stephen, needs to be changed, where you've got your boroughs and your districts, that they still think it's not their job. Well, actually, it is their job, because that's why we're elected, and that's where I'd like to see the change come from.
And just on that, there is some good work being done. We finally have back now a county-wide CSP, and actually this is a really good place for partners to actually get around the table and discuss it. And I think I've had some representations to see some of the district ones form together. That's the right place to deal with it, because you need a holistic approach. That sharing of information between housing, if someone's serial, actually make their life difficult in terms of. That's why I genuinely think that we can't enforce our way out of it. This requires at school level a healthy relationship education. It needs a holistic approach to make sure that we're doing it. Some of Nicky's team that's working in terms of our ACE coordinators. I've said it previously, these kids that come from families where someone's abusing someone go on to be the offenders of the future if we don't prevent them and do the early. And that's why we're investing in those services to stop that.
Yeah. Yes, Anita.
Stephen, when I attended at Warwick House, I spoke to Stephanie regarding domestic abuse, and then one of the questions I was asking is the funding, and then she said that the funding were only there for 2 years, and then after that they didn't know. Is it not a short-term approach of this project? Because domestic abuse is a national problem, and as you have pointed out, your ideas are very good, and Sunflower is very good for that. But unless this is tackled in a more serious way, in terms of providing the funding on a permanent basis, this is just going to be a political, perhaps, agenda that one commissioner may not agree with your policy. I mean, I hope that you're staying, but let's say that in the future you're not there and somebody else taking it. Where are we with Sunflower, for instance?
Well, thank you for the good wishes. Thank you for the good wishes you've offered me for staying. I'd like to at the moment, because I think I've got, as demonstrated, a lot of work to do. Paul, Nicky and Paul over there are probably wanting to bang their heads against the wall for the work they've done, particularly over the sunflower. Because to be honest, we were, and it's a matter of public record, the only ones that have given a longer term commitment financially to make sure it's there, to encourage other parties, because actually it's funded by a mixture of districts, county and health. But at the moment, the long term commitments have only come from health and from me. So you're absolutely right. I totally agree with you, and that's why it needs a collective response. Because otherwise, if we're not careful, we have this kind of absurd situation there where they're continually at risk because of the uncertainty of it. And the problem is you're right. You know, could I afford to fund it? Not easily, not by myself. And in some respects, even if we then did that, everyone think, well, it's being dealt with by the police. And actually, as I keep repeatedly saying, everyone has a role to play in this, and it's really important. One of the real positive things I see coming out of not the only positive thing I see coming out of the unitary discussion is you currently have the statutory obligation to deal with vulnerability at the county council level. The ability to solve it from a housing point of view is a district level. That fundamentally for me is flawed. So those coming together in the statutory authorities provides an absolute opportunity, and hopefully we can deliver a better service on it. And I do hope that maybe we should have a DV pledge on every council, anyone seeking election next time, to share their commitment to it. I quite like that idea. I'll put it on mine. I'll see if anyone challenges me. And any of the other councillors would like to add that to theirs. I look forward to it.
Okay. I think we need to move on. As James has just pointed out, we're still on matters arising. So we need to move on. Okay. The next item on the agenda is the police and crime plan delivery update. So if the PCC would like to take us through.
Madam Chairman, this is where I thought I was going to get my questions. Today's report highlights just some of the work the OPCC has updated since I last saw you. It also includes some force performance data to provide an indication of the demand being placed on the force and the challenges it finds itself under. I've also, and I believe you've got copies, I don't think you've got yours, Mary, but we'll get one down to you, of the county-wide road safety strategy, which obviously is an excellent document, which I'm confident will bring major benefits in terms of reducing the pain and suffering inflicted on our society by avoidable deaths and serious injuries in the road. And I think one of the things I would particularly commend around this, it's not just a police response. What's nice about this is it talks about all the people involved, so police, fire, ambulance and highways. That joined up approach we need to see more of, and the same work that we've done there would be a good example of where I would like to see us on DV. The report also works out how we've been successful in obtaining government funding to support work being undertaken to tackle gang-related violence, as well as scheme to assist women offenders, which helps break the cycle of offending and enable them to turn their lives around. Early intervention is at the heart of my police and crime plan, and these two schemes represent how this can bring real changes to people's lives. And for those of you who had your lunch, it was provided by the Good Loaf today, and that's doing a great job of turning women's lives around. And you'll see one of them is £250,000 for a Good Loaf in the north of the county. For those of us that are in Northampton have that facility, but we're lucky that you're going to be having it. Sadly not in Corby, but in the town next to you, okay? Yes. Some people I can never make happy, can't I? Yes. Well, you will be one authority soon, won't you? Yeah. Obviously not presuming anything that comes out of the consultation. Appendix 1 of the report also updates and provides further commentary on the delivery priorities of the police and the crime panel. Would you like, I tell you what, there's no point in, you've read it, I'll probably just take questions is the better way of doing this, I suspect. All right. Well,
I commend the amount of work that's going on. I'll just, as it says at the beginning, that about registering interest. I just had an interest that I was on the Russian Town Council that did give funding to the retail crime initiative, and so I thought I better mention it here, but such initiatives are very good. So Richard, I think you're first.
Yeah, just two areas. First of all, you know, there is some really good work being done. I love smart policing, looking at trying to prevent issues occurring, prevent recidivism. All those things are just smart policing. It's about trying to deal with the demand at the wrong end of policing. But there's a couple of points here. The first one is I just want some reassurance with regard to the PCSOs. It's always good news that we're getting more assets, more resources to help us reassure the public and deal with rising crime. However, when you look at this particular programme, I just want some reassurance that we're not just placating what I call the worried well. You know, those leafy parishes that may have the money that can afford to pay for a PCSO, where intelligence wouldn't actually lead us to put in any assets there at all, or less assets there at all. So my reassurance for the greater community is that, one, that these assets are actually required because there is an intelligence need for them based on the criminal statistics and the fear of crime, and that other places like the Racecourse, Kingsthorpe, Abington, who probably have got a higher demand for policing presence, are getting the resources they need. Because if it's just about who can afford to pay, then I think we've got to be careful we're going down the wrong road there. It's got to be about where are the assets most needed, are the assets where they should be, and we should not be getting ourselves involved in just policing the worried well. There needs to be an intelligence reason for assets to be there. Does that make any sense? It's broader. I don't know specifics, but if it makes... So that's the first one, and I'll come back on the second one. So thank you.
You know me, if I could take them one at a time, it's always it's easier to concentrate. I unashamedly say here, so look, within the funding envelope we've got, we have allocated all of our PCSOs in the place where there is the greatest risk. That is the basis that they allocate on. And but there are some odd things. So if I take South Northants as an example, it's actually it's the safest place in the county. It's actually probably one of the safest places in the country. But the fear of crime there is also the highest. So I am precept capped, if you like, under some uncertainty, and we'll talk about funding in a second. We created the opportunity for communities, if they wanted additionality, they could have that additionality. It will not and does not skew our allocations because they're done on demand. It's about if you've got a community that wants to pay extra, rather than hire private security, why wouldn't it be better that they have a PCSO that's plugged into our communities? Is it double taxation for those communities? Potentially, yes, because in many of the respects, those are the communities that pay the most for policing and probably get the least. They are, if you like, our PCSOs are in our most challenging communities that cannot afford it. So in some respects, it does give us a greater coverage. And also it's worth highlighting, so since 2010, we had 166 PCSOs, and probably is one of the areas that's got hit the hardest. Some of that the county council used to fund a number of PCSOs across the thing, but given their funding challenges have been unable to do so. So if you like, those communities get hit hardest in that they're paying twice. If they choose to do so, it's excellent. I suppose I want to be very reassuring. It does not mean that we're looking, you know, the more challenging communities are getting any less. If anything, it probably secures them even more because actually we're able to keep a good throughput in terms of additional capability. Particularly over Daventry Way, where you represent, they've taken to it particularly well, and the satisfaction that we've had from them has been really quite striking. But in the end, you know, you've got essentially 10 extra PCSOs that wouldn't be there if those parishes wouldn't pay for them. It hasn't affected anything else. Now, I'm comfortable with that.
Thank you.
Did you,
just on one other point, it's just with regard to the quarterly performance and with regard to demand. It is really about busyness, and I'm sure there's somebody in your office that, as they get these things through, are asking more important questions that the public want to know, which is about effectiveness and efficiency. For instance, 2,900 arrests, but how many were charged and summoned and cautioned? 322 stop and searches, how many resulted in prohibited items being found or arrests? When we talk about 591 missing reports, missing people, how many are still outstanding? I think we accept that the force is busy, but I think if we're going to bother to get these figures together, it doesn't take much to just give us a view on the effectiveness and the efficiency of that busyness. Although you are ultimately responsible, I know you can't impact on the operation, but it gives us an idea on how we are doing, but without making it to such an odious task that it becomes just figures. So this is about busyness. I accept that we are busy, all forces are busy, but for me, so what? How are we doing with regard to that busyness, with regard to our effectiveness and our efficiency?
Several parts in terms of the answer to that question. I suppose the first one is no matter, I always have some trepidation. Whenever I provide more information, everyone asks even more information from me. So it is a bit like that. It's trying to provide the right levels. I suppose in some respects, the answer to that question is very simple. We have an accountability board, and probably I'm happy to, actually, as an action we should probably take away from this. If we send you formally as a panel the accountability papers, so I formally meet with the chief and his team every month, and there are reports around exactly that on each of the different elements, and then their response, and you'll then see whether I'm happy, unhappy, and or going to go back. Those are the bits I think that's formally how I hold the force to account at the highest level. Those are documents that we make public afterwards, so just having them sent to you is something which you probably do. It's not light reading, but actually you'll then get the context there. This is just really to kind of give you a flavour. And, I look at on one of the ones in terms of highlights on here. Actually, it does allow me to open up a bit of debate about the demand on policing. We have some 200,000 incidents a year. Actually, you see on here, 68,500 are public safety and welfare incidents. And let me break down some of those numbers for you, because you are absolutely right, the force is phenomenally busy. Are they doing something that they were doing 5-10 years ago, that they're picking up the slack from other services at the same time that the county has grown by 9% since 2010? So I'll just give you some of the ones. Concern for safety, 26,500 of them. So that might be, I'm worried about Mrs. Miggins. It's always poor old Mrs. Miggins, isn't it? Missing persons, 2,938. 1,500 civil disputes. Sudden deaths, 1,100 people. No one's saying that some aren't things you do, but it's worth. We do have a lot more detail. 722 bail, 300 domestic animal incidents, 242 absent people. We've even had care homes ring us up and say, can you bring that person up? We're not a taxi. The police are not a taxi service. So actually there is more work I want to see done on the concern for safety, because actually they're picking up demand, and particularly it really does peak on a Friday afternoon about 4:30 when a bunch of other services go home. One of the few 24/7 businesses, if I might put it that way, is the police service. So part of my reason for showing you is just to give you some insight of demand. I'm more than happy to share with you, and I think probably what you're particularly looking for, Richard. And if anyone, I'm happy to. We're looking to provide more detailed information to the public going forward on a quarterly basis, so they can also get a sense of what's up, what's down, and those. But I think the accountability board papers will probably, you in particular, will really enjoy them.
Do you think there could be an appendices to your monthly report? Just add it on there, or some other fashion of communicating.
I think what we'll do is we'll probably, when we publish, I think the easiest thing is on the day we publish them, we should just make sure that we have an email that kind of goes around. Or we'll send them to James and let him circulate too. I think is the best. Otherwise, given the dates of those, don't always tie up. So, for instance, the next accountability board is on Tuesday. So you'd suddenly not get them until February. So we'll send them to you sooner rather than later.
Okay.
Sorry, just a really quick one, and it's been really preying on my mind, and I've got to say it, is that domestic violence debate we had, I do feel we left it too loose. Somebody needs to take the lead for the county. Appreciate we need to bring all people together, but somebody has to be that lead, and I would respectfully suggest that you with your team should lead on that, ensuring that everybody's coming in line so we get a strategy for Northamptonshire. If not you, who? I just think it's left too loose, and I would strongly request that from you and your team.
As I said, I'm going to bring forth to the next meeting what we're all doing about it, and then I will use that to challenge some other people. As I sat here listening to it, and with your keen encouragement, it might be a great thing that we could cajole all of the authorities around the county, and we could have a domestic abuse summit. So I think if everyone would take that back to us, I look forward to organising it, and we'll help chair and bring that together.
Okay. Thank you. I think, Mary, you were first. You wanted to come.
Mine's just very quick, really. It's regards going back to PCSOs. A very quick question. Corby used to fund 2 PCSOs, Corby Council, and what happened to our PCSOs that they were removed and placed in Oundle. So when we turned around and realised the 2 PCSOs we were funding had disappeared, then the Borough Council decided to not fund anymore. So I would like to think if you're asking people to pay more money, they'll be guaranteed that then PCSOs will be allocated to the area of which is paying for them, and they won't be removed to be placed somewhere else, because we weren't very happy, to be honest, at the time. Thank you.
So you throw the ball in the air, and I'm going to knock it out of the park. Some of on coming into office, there were some very valuable conversations I have. Elections aren't the easiest thing, but it does give you a lot of conversations that you could have with a number of people. So this has been a pet thing for me, and the experiences in Corby and also Wootton and Hardingstone were particularly ones that preyed on my mind. In it is a guarantee that 90% of their time is spent in the area that pays for them. There is a quarterly contract management meeting. If for any reason that they are not in there, there is rebate paid accordingly. So that also is the benefit to the force, actually, in terms of additionality. And there is a contract. I'm very happy to come and present back to Corby, because I think they might like the new scheme. But it carries those, and I mean, we had as you know, the horrific incident last week in Walgrave, and actually the sergeant in Daventry he actually rang up the chair of a sponsoring one and said, "Can I borrow your PCSO?" And on explaining what happened, they said, look, for some reassurance in terms of that. I think it was literally a day and a half of their time. They were more than happy to support, because actually got the relationship. It's very explicit about if it falls below that limit, you get your money back. So we did learn from lessons such as Corby.
I think the new system is obviously much better than it was previously. Danielle, I think you're next.
Thank you. I've got 3 questions, but they're all quite brief.
Mike.
Oh, sorry. There is a concern, Stephen, about private policing, and the concern has grown because the university is now employing its own police people. So I just, and I take what Councillor Auger was saying really seriously. I do think policing is a strategic service, and it shouldn't be a private one. And, we need some assurances, really, that the police themselves have got a grip on what is going on in South Northampton, the parishes, at the university, because otherwise it doesn't feel very safe, and it feels very, very unequal. So that was one.
Should we do them in order?
Think, yeah.
Can I do that one? Particularly, look, there's 2 ways, and let me use the university as a kind of a case in point. The other way of looking at it is you've got 12,000 individuals that are in our community that no one here asked to come to our community, and actually there is an additional policing requirement. I mean, we've got terrible things that criminal gangs go to. You've actually got absurd situations where gangs actually think it's right for them to pay for people to go to university to cuckoo and deal drugs from in a university. It is a multi-year pilot. It's particularly because we think the risk is increased, particularly at the beginning, and early indications have been they've kind of very successful. No one's trying to make sure that there's any form of privatisation of policing, that any money gives any form of kind of preference. But I particularly take the PCSO, which one I stand behind, because like I said, you've got some people, the fear of crime is a big issue in those communities, and it's about additionality. Because as Richard mentioned there, on threat, risk and harm, we're probably never going to put a PCSO in those communities unless they paid for it in terms of additionality. I'd be sticking another one in Kingsthorpe, I'd be sticking another one in our other areas rather than more in those roles. So I'm comfortable with that. On the university alone, we're talking about 6 cops. We've 1,227. So it's about additionality for a couple of years for a particular challenge of 12,000 people that are in a particular area that could have a very significant demand. And actually, why should the residents of Northampton end up picking up a bigger bill because they've got a university when they might not necessarily? And particularly people in your community paying extra for something that they're seeing kind of no benefit of, but potentially antisocial behaviour and or other issues that could affect them. So it's only on a very carefully selected basis that we consider. And to be honest, I have no other considerations that are in the hopper, if you know what I mean.
Okay,
I hope that provides you with some reassurance.
So my second question...
you haven't got your microphone on.
Sorry. My second question is something that I raised at the Adult Safeguarding Board, which is, are you aware that women sleeping rough on the streets are beginning to disclose really serious sexual offences committed against them? I know the numbers are small, but I think it's a really serious issue, and I'm not aware that it's being noted or addressed anywhere.
Wasn't aware of it personally, but I will both inquire from the force point of view and also task particularly Voice Our Victim Service to make sure that maybe some outreach there to actually give them the opportunity to do it. But it's a discussion I'll take away with the police. Nikki sits on that for us, so I'll have a look at that.
And then the last question, Chair, sorry, very quickly. You'll be aware, because I've taken you around, that some of the communities that I represent feel...
Do you want to clarify what you mean by...
they feel a bit under siege from criminal and antisocial elements in the community. And in the last round of work that we did as a multi-agency group, one of the things that the police said to me, and it's totally understandable, but, it's not good enough really, I don't think, is that when we've got gangs selling drugs on our estates and they're left there and we know where they live and we can identify them and they keep coming on and we see them pulling out great woods and oats and we see them on their bikes and whatever, what the police say, oh, but we want the big boys. There's a big issue about that, and one of the issues for me is that the women on the estate are frightened for their children. They don't want their children being groomed by those older brothers or those cousins or those neighbours, So I think people understand that the police focus is to stop it at source. We understand that. But we've got real issues about how to keep our communities safe. You talk about the fear of crime. This is rightfully a fear of crime because it's happening on people's doorsteps.
There's two bits. One's a kind of a technical point, but firstly, let me say I share your concerns, and you're right. We've been out and I've seen firsthand. The first thing I would kind of say, look, Northamptonshire Police as a percentage of its total resource, 79, I think is it 0.6 of our resource is actually front line. So, and that's, I think it's 0.1% below the kind of national average. So in terms of our overall. Now, but when I look at frontline and visible frontline, actually 39.3 of it is non-visible frontline and 29.6 is visible frontline. So some of the conversation I've been having with the new chief, who shares our concern particularly around neighbourhood policing, burglary and what you're describing there as low-level drug dealing, needs to become much more of a bread and butter priority for the force. And he's coming forth, and I know he feels like that. I don't want to presuppose what he puts in his operational strategy. So how it works is you've got the police and crime plan, and then he takes us. He's used to, as you know, policing the equivalents of Moss Side, Manchester and stuff like that. So actually he understands the deterrent effect, and this kind of then leads back to the point around precept that we were asked earlier. Should I be raising the precept by £24? I would like to see all of that money going to those three priorities, which is, frontline policing, visible frontline policing in our neighbourhoods, also making sure that it's around drugs and antisocial behaviour, that they involve in terms of burglary. So we do take it seriously. But I would also say, look, the force currently is a force on paper that requires improvement. We haven't been doing a good enough job, and part of the reason also myself and the chief have been out in communities is actually to hear first-hand from people their challenges. And I commend the new chief for his work in that area. But I feel confident that things are going to get better. But and I don't mean it as an excuse, we have I think the exact number is something like 2,088 full-time equivalent, protecting now 740,000 people. When you compare that from 2010, when it was something like 2,679, protecting 660. So actually you've not only got a decrease of people, you've also got a growth in population of a further sort of 60,000. And I don't say that in terms of as any form of excuse, because actually we need to prioritise those areas, and the chief understands them. And I'm quite happy to come about and actually even come with the chief and us show some of that. All right?
Anita, yeah.
I've got two questions, Stephen. One is tackling almost what this lady's just been saying, and that is right at the heart of the town centre of Northampton. Now, I came to town in the morning in town centre during a week, and the whole of the surface of Marks and Spencer, there were homeless, sleeping rough. Similarly, in front of British Home Stores, I had tent there and everything. I've never seen Northampton street so bad as it is today. And I would like to know what you are intending to do in order to resolve the problem of homelessness. That's my first question. My second question is about performance. On page 22, I do like the quota comparison table statistic, because this is what I've asked previously, to show the previous years and compare with this year's. And you show the statistic on a quota comparison, those who have improved and those who have gone down, really. The following table, on the other hand, is really puzzling me, because it lacks clarity, and I would like to have some explanation, and that is table 4.3, year-on-year change. Now, you said right on the first stop, you said total recorded crime 57,996. Then you have at the bottom PSW 68,559. Now, if you're going to give an analysis, then everything else below 57,996 has got to come to a total of 57,996, because I do not know where this 68,559, that's an additional things. Then you're saying, I'm looking at the two biggest one of the last 12 months, violence, 18837, which is year on change, 16.2. You say 2 of the last 6 months into exception. I don't understand the terminology. I would like to have more clarification on that. Similarly with ASB, who's 21,835. Now there is a decrease in that of 21.8 within normal variation. Again, I would have liked to see the previous 12 months, so like that, you didn't need to put the variation in percentage because, well, if you put it, that would be even better. But like this, we can see the improvement compared to the last 12 months. Thank you.
There's 2 parts to that question. 2 parts to that question. The first one on homelessness, what am I personally going to do about it? Nothing. Because actually, homelessness is not a policing function. It's actually a local authority function and needs to be dealt with by them. I don't mean that in some glib way that says I don't care about it. Me and my colleague cycled 270 miles for the people of Northampton to raise money for the homelessness. So I don't want anyone to take from that I don't care about it. And I'm particularly vexed about and concerned about what's going on with the Hope Centre and what's going on in terms of homeless here in Northamptonshire, particularly in Northampton. So actually my challenge is to Northampton what they're going to do. If there's any law breaking, then that's the responsibility of policing. I fully get that actually a large number of homeless people actually does make people feel less safe, but actually it is the responsibility currently of the borough and will be the Western Authority in terms of dealing with it. I'm happy to work with them on it, and part of some of the work that we do in conjunction with the Hope Centre will do that, but I am very, very worried about what that might go. I probably go back on these numbers. They are there for indicative purposes only. I will explain those in a few seconds. I think the information you're looking for is going to be in the accountability board, so they're extracted from it. I think what I'm going to do, if you don't mind, I'm no longer to give you these numbers because actually they're probably out of context, and I think because they are in the accountability board papers and they'll do it. But probably what I should just explain, the total recorded crime is, as you see there, the 57,996. The total number of incidents for Northamptonshire is over 200,000 incidents. It's just highlighting the fact that 25% of our demand is crime. And I'm happy to, the little one that I said earlier, the 68559 was the bit that I was circulating earlier. I mean, but talking of numbers that don't add up, somebody's got this one out as well. Mine says 68558, so somebody's lost one incident, which I should take up with you afterwards, Stuart. You've lost one up to 68,000. So you're right about making sure these numbers add up. I was going to say, I want to know where that one particularly is. I was just highlighting that earlier on, those public safety welfare incidents and antisocial behaviour, they're not always recorded as crime. Some are, some aren't. But these ones, abandoned, called, missing. I think the best way for me to deal with it is if I provide the accountability board papers, then you'll have all of the context. Because with the utmost respect, your job is to hold me to account and what I'm doing to hold the force to account. I think the accountability board will give you that assurance, and I'm more than happy to take from you kind of questions, but I think that'll probably answer what you're actually looking for.
Thank you. I think there's something like...
Trying to overshare and it's not working, is it?
PSW, I mean, I didn't know what it was anyway. I got it from what you said there, but sometimes these acronyms don't help as well, so...
like I say, the full report will probably will benefit, if you like. Yeah. We were just trying, as you know, since coming to office, I've always tried to make sure that we overshare, but I also get that if we're not sharing in a totality without weighing it down. So I think I think probably taking some questions on the accountability will probably help to solve that.
Okay, we've got a couple more questions. Andre, I think you're next. And then
thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. My question's around 3.2 and the fire and rescue governance, and there isn't a mention in there, but I'm sure you have a good plan for it in terms of the continuing to develop the retained duty system within the fire and rescue service, and clearly the importance that we not just have with them, but the contribution that they make to our society, which is enormous. Clearly, there are many factors in terms of employment and employers moving from those residential areas, perhaps in rural and even in urban areas, that affects clearly the role and the availability of retained duty service staff. But it would be essential clearly to continue with that and to find a way to motivate and to develop that service. As we know, we depend on that. The other point, and I'll let you answer that too, but the other point is reference drugs and criminality around that in the county. I haven't seen within your report a section in terms of drugs, both hard and soft, and there are significant issues there in terms of clearly manpower, the availability of county lines, but particularly in events and functions that are held, public events, and it is rife, unfortunately, in terms of marijuana and other areas there being visibly openly sold. Now, I've seen and reported myself to police officers who've been present there at events, public events, and they openly admit they just don't have the resources to follow up these issues, and they are, clearly focusing on very large crime areas, but these are little crimes, if you like, or certainly important crimes that are harming our youngsters in society, and that availability, apart from the fact they can smell it when they're coming across any particular group, leads into other crimes. So I'd very much hope that we take a very strong line on that, and I appreciate that resources are hard to come by, but it is an important point because this getting into young people's hands develops other criminality. Thank you.
Two parts to that. Does everyone, as part of that, because obviously, Andre, you have a detailed knowledge of what retained means, would it benefit for anyone else know what retained mean? Councillor Strachan might, but others might not. So just for everyone's benefit, you have whole-time firefighters, and then what retained means, if you like, they are part-time firefighters who live in their communities and support. So should there be a shout, then they would quickly decant to the fire engine and then leave accordingly. It's an area that's actually nationally, with how working practices have worked, have been under pressure for quite a number of years, whereby people are not living within their local communities, so that's making the provision more difficult. To give you some idea, at any one time, so we have 22 stations in the county at this moment in time. Probably during the day, which actually is the prime risk, we're probably looking between 12 and 14 engines being available, but there has been a particular challenge in Retain which the service has been admirably trying to deal with. One of your primary challenges is to make sure you've got a driver. It obviously requires a skilled individual to drive a truck that large. So I just want to reiterate, because the key question was, are we committed to the retained? Yes, we are. We are primarily a retained service, and we will be looking for new and innovative ways to continue to support that. I only use this as an example, but this is where some of that interplay can work. And the gentleman in question might not even be interested, but I use it as an example. Someone who's in Woodford Hulse recently, it has a firehouse. And a fire engine, but quite often they have a challenge to make sure that there is someone to drive their fire engine on a regular basis. Well, actually, Woodford Hulse have not long ago just started sponsoring a PCSO, whose job it is to continue to patrol just in Woodford Hulse. With us bringing these things together, it's not beyond the wit of man that if he expressed an interest in wanting to drive, albeit retained, he can earn some extra money, and the availability in that area goes up significantly, because in theory he's always in that area. So we will be looking at innovative ways to do that. Obviously we do have the benefit that any kind of council tax raise on the fire and rescue service gets to be invested in the fire and rescue service, something I know Councillor the Savage has actually worked very hard to try and maintain, despite the challenges in the county. But that money will actually be going in there, so both to maintain our vehicle, and we genuinely want to make sure that we make more of those fire engines available that we have and that are deployable. And actually I think there's some really great work that they can do in terms of prevention. For instance, you've got people who are victims of burglary. the fire and rescue service already does safe and well checks. Well, if a safe and well check as someone who's just had a burglary actually included making sure that they fitted some window locks and or stuff like that, would enhance that, and that would have an effect both on the feeling of safety but also genuine safety in terms of the county. I'm not prescribing that, but I'm just giving you some of the ideas that the possibilities that can exist out there of the two services working together. And actually, if we can get them sharing the same scheduling system and bringing the control rooms together, those things all become much easier. And that's about additionality that people can do to make the people of Northamptonshire safer.
Can I just follow up on that?
I haven't finished. Sorry, I was just about to say. Can I just finish the second part of the question?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Unless you had something on fire,
No,
but I think you had one for drugs.
It was on fire. That was fine.
Do you want to do fire and then I'll go back to his drugs one?
Yeah.
I haven't.
Well, it was really, what are you putting in place to know so that you've got the information that you need to supervise and to govern the fire? Because obviously it's a whole new aspect of your role, and that's going to be obviously taking up quite a bit of your time in future.
The first piece of kind of reassurance, it's taken us a number of years to develop a functioning accountability process for policing. So we've both also been looking at what other police, fire and crime commissioners do, also what other authorities have done to hold them to account. And actually in that we found that the process that we find for policing around accountability, themes, reports meets the model kind of very well. So we will start, if you like, on the same basis and use the robust methodology that we have already got. But some of you will know I've attended the fire service have a force executive group, so they actually go around and they meet each of the individual stations. So I've gone around doing those Q&As from them, both to provide reassurance but also to learn for myself. I even had a rather exciting day where I got to rescue, admittedly it was a dummy horse, but I did manage to go and rest. God, it was heavy, I tell you, moving that around. It was a right workout after the end of the day. I like to try and get out and see what's going on the front line.
Okay. If you'd care to answer the second question, if Andre.
So, I suppose the two things, one, an op Viper, which I put some extra money in, and that's why the report is included in there, to make sure that, and I personally went on a drugs den raid in, actually just up from the police station in Wellingborough, to actually see firsthand where we're actually really taking the fight to drugs here in Northamptonshire, but more needs to be done. But it's interesting, you mentioned, for instance, there also a bit cannabis. So, some of the bits that I got, we particularly have probably over-targeted cannabis for stop and search. So actually I've got you on that one ear, on the other ear I'm like, on stop and search you're over-targeting it. We actually need to make drugs a very difficult place to exist here in Northamptonshire. Some of you have heard me talk about it, but with some changes we've made to MOPS, and that's our regional collaboration that includes dogs, guns and road, where we've actually brought some of our resources back to the county. We've doubled the number of dogs we've got in the county. And what's really exciting about that then enables us to, if an officer needs one, there's likely to be one. It got to a point where people going, well, we won't bother because we're never going to get supported. But because we've now got that capability in the county, they can be, if you like, dual dog handlers. I'm sure there's a better definition than that. And actually we can increase, because if we've got the vehicles, it's a very small amount for a dog. So actually I'm hoping, it's a discussion me and the chief haven't had, that we can expand our capacity around drug dogs. The reason I say it is because me and him haven't had a conversation about it, but I was at a Q&A he was doing with some of his officers yesterday and he agreed to think about it. So I think between us it'd be something we're very interested in doing. But I also want to reassure you that we do, and you'll be seeing in the new year there's a campaign about highlighting to people how difficult it's going to be. And you'll notice even just in the drink driving thing, we're testing for drugs as well. Because actually, at the end of the day, there are some of these people that think they're doing, and middle class people think they're doing kind of white drugs and it doesn't have any effect. That's what's helping to drive knife activity in our communities. So we need to be very pernicious about it and be hard-hitting and make sure that people understand they are having an effect. You know, and those drug dogs, I'm all for, and I was going to name a business then, I won't, but go and get them stand outside the entrance to some of our businesses on their way in. You know, we really need to make sure that you are contributing to your community not being safe. Because if we can drive down the market for it, there will be less money in it and they'll go on and do something else, along with our other in terms of diversionary. So there is, I want to be reassuring, there is, but there also is the, if you like, there's the warm, fluffy stuff we're doing to prevent them getting involved, but you're also going to see the big stick as well.
Winston, I think you had a question. Do you want to put your speaker on there?
You might want to call it closer to you. Oops, the turn on. Sorry, I think I've turned yours off by turning on.
All right. My question is, well, it's not much of a question, it's just a request. We have on page 21, 4.1, 322 stop search conducted. One of the problems that the Black minority group has is that there's a continuous complaint about that particular group, for which I'm part of, is seeing a lot more police stop and search than any other group. So could we have some sort of indication as to, in future, as to how much, you know, when you give the figures, how much of those involve the stop and search of the Black and minority community? That would be helpful, I think. Not just for me, but for the community at large.
I'd like to under-promise and over-deliver, Councillor Strachan. I could probably do better, actually, than that, if you would like. In the last 6 months, we've took some significant steps to actually review what effect it's having on in our communities. And so Chief Inspector Alexander Lloyd has taken a lead in developing our strategy to make sure that we are more proportionate. And actually we invited the Open Society and the London School of Economics to evaluate our stop and search reasonable grounds panel. So our reasonable grounds panel is whenever we do a stop and search, it is automatically referred to our reasonable grounds panel to make sure that they look and did it meet reasonable grounds. And if I may extend an invitation to you to perhaps come and see that in work, and or anyone on the panel that is kind of interested in it, but I will bring forth to you the output from the work that we're doing. So significant work is being done in that area. Do I think we are doing as good a job as we would? No, because part of the problem is, you're right, disproportionately, I think, as I said there, we've probably overly focused on cannabis and the smell of it in terms of, and that tends to, in terms of the young. So actually we need to do a better job, but I think I can actually come back and demonstrate that. But also that is included in the data where and the methodology that's in the accountability board. But I'll bring back to you a copy of the report that's being done for me, but I will extend to you an invitation to see firsthand how we review them, and we have won some awards from that, but I still think we have more work to do.
Okay, well, we've got a way to go. If I could just ask you, that there are quite a few items that are on amber that are dates of completion in 2017.
Can I make this one easier for you? Given which I'm going to talk to you later, from a structural change and some technology that's going to come forth, I'm going to bring forth a new format for you, because what's happened is I'm not some of them are kind of on amber, probably shouldn't even have been there or have changed and or evolved. So what I'm keen to do is make sure, if you like, there's a dashboard that details with what we're trying to achieve on the police and crime plan, but is also reflective of the operational delivery. So, and I'm not picking on Nikki because she's here, but some of the stuff that we put down for our initial thoughts before we'd done the research on early intervention and the learnings that we took meant that some of the things that we had there, we chose not to do, and we've done something different. Now, this format doesn't necessarily make that easier. So I make a commitment to you. It might not be ready in time for the next one, but there will be a new format to come. Happy to take questions on any, but I just want to kind of reassure you, along along with an update to the police and crime plan, given the change to fire and that I've been in post for 2.5 years, will come forth. But I'm happy to take some questions around particular themes if you want.
Well, I think one particular one that stood out was rural crime, and obviously being there's a big rural area, and that was amputated, and I think there was a strategy that you were working on, and that hasn't yet.
I do hate it when you know what I'm going to say before I say it, Madam Chairman.
Well, we have to start exchanging these ideas beforehand. Yeah, no, I wonder if you could tell us where you are on that.
Well, I think it's two things. One of you will have seen kind of yesterday, look, I've said on one level it's important that we've got there in terms of a deterrent to make sure that we're there, and actually the expansion of Taser into actually neighbourhoods. Some of you see we're funding an extra 50 Taser on top of the ones that we already have in the county to make sure and those are primarily focused in neighbourhoods and rural areas, something that's very much a first for Northamptonshire. But I also will bring forth the new rural strategy. It's not quite complete yet, but the one thing I would kind of give you some reassurance on, and having gone and sat with a bunch of farmers, it was a very pleasant evening where they come and ask me some questions in conjunction with the NFU, that I'm confident we might not be where we'd want to be, but they happen to farm the south of the county, and they particularly complemented Northamptonshire's, admittedly it only has 2 specific rural officers, but actually it said, look, if Thames Valley had got those same, it would transform our relationship with them. Do I think 2 is enough? No, and one of the things I'd be looking for is an extra commitment for rural as part of any funding settlement that we ask there. But it will tie in with the strategy, but rural is a very important part, because actually one of the things we were supposed to be doing was improving our response in terms of performance in that area, and I'm not convinced that the model under the previous chief is doing that, which is why the new one's modifying it.
Okay, I think Laura, you're next.
Yes. Thank you. Could I come back to 3.4 on the Serious Youth Violence Early Intervention Fund? I congratulate Northamptonshire Police for being able to obtain £627,000. I attended last week Combating Gangs Violence.
I think some people in my office are going to object to slightly the language you put there, because I think it's Northamptonshire Police and Crime Commission and Northamptonshire Police and other partners that did it. So we want to be inclusive, if you like. And I'm sure Nikki will be offended that you didn't, because she did a lot of the work on it. If she might work on her confirmation bit. So actually, it wasn't just Northamptonshire Police. I know I might be being pedantic, but I don't want to get it in the ear after this meeting.
It just said. I'm repeating what it said.
I'm only teasing you, Laura.
By my office at Northamptonshire Police, so I stand corrected.
I'm only teasing.
I know, and I'm not taking it serious. But I attended last week Combating Gangs, Violence and Weapon Crime, a conference in London, which was very interesting, attended by some police officers. The outcome of which it was highlighted very much what this report is reflecting. On the back of that, how are Northamptonshire Police and everybody in the surrounding areas and everybody connected with it going to engage with councillors, with community groups and others, because there's some very valuable works, and especially with schools, because one of the most horrific things is when young people who are being excluded from schools, they tick a box because they go into a special school where they meet a lot of their friends and feel very happy there because they achieved something in life. So are you going to work with that? And then following on from the conference, Commissioner Cressida Dick actually spoke very passionately about it, and the understanding was basically to increase police presence, to stamp out gun-related crime, and especially drug dealing. Unfortunately for me, part of my ward in Wellingborough has the most prolific gun-related crimes, and members of gangs, as well as the main two drug-dealing families. And so from our point of view, it is very important for us that we are involved in some shape or form to help. But may I make a suggestion that the residents are also being listened to, and not just hold them when they phone in crimes on 101, because although the KPIs are being ticked in, the call is answered very quickly, usually they hang on the telephone for about 45 minutes to an hour plus. They want to report stuff. Is there any mechanism like text to tell, something like that, that you could invent for Northamptonshire Police to make it easier for residents, for anybody, to give that information that so often is so vital, even if it takes you to an entry on Facebook where it's blatantly clear what crimes are being committed there, because they are not hiding it in any shape or form. And having myself reported it to the police with no action happening that is visible to me, could you please take that on board?
Yes.
This is obviously our first one together, Laura. If I miss anything in your question, I'm going to try and answer all of those points in kind of one go. I will make a couple of points that bore some other people. If only we had the money that Cressida has per head of population, what we could do. You know, I'm not saying we've got those same challenges, but £200 per resident relative to our 100. That's my only dig. Now I'm going to answer your question. Yeah. Well, that's per head of population. So she gets £200 per resident. We get £102 per resident. Compare that with Durham that gets 140 or Nottingham that gets 120. Anyway, so I should probably revisit them. One of the things I'm very passionate about and why we've made some investment in early intervention, I will probably have sent to you, because the others have heard of it, and perhaps we'll come and arrange a briefing for you around some of our early intervention activities, which takes several forms. Some are adverse childhood experience worker, our ability to put in place a youth service, because I think that's sadly missing here in the county, and particularly also some of the work the police are doing as part of the SERV programme in terms of lessons from Glasgow. But a lot of those, in terms of our analysis around exclusions doubles the chances of someone going on a pathway to crime. You've also got nearly 1,000 kids that are home educated here in the county, so they're not being excluded. The pupil premium is still being taken by somebody, but actually they're there. And you've also got some who are in terms of part-time. All of those are a very serious concern for us. And actually, you know, if you've got someone who's got a challenging home life, and then as a consequence, the only thing that they've got stable in their life is the school, and you take that away, it's no surprise that they then go on to find some other form of family, no matter how dysfunctional it is, such as a kind of gangs. But to answer some of the others, I funded in conjunction, I think I got in just before the funding ran out, so we funded with the Home Office, and it's a 50-50. It's a locality review where the Home Office are coming round and they are meeting with councillors, and maybe you're not on the thing, I'll take that away and we'll inquire where they are with that, particularly in your area, where they're doing a review of, you know, the challenges, and it's a holistic view of what's kind of going on in a particular area. So I will follow that one. But on your other one about contacting and 101, happy to, by the way, and this is open to all, to arrange for a visit to the control room so you can see firsthand what's going on. If you just let us know, Louise will arrange that for you and or anyone else. But we'll also arrange, it's a briefing for you in the new year around our digital 101 that we're working on to make exactly that point. One of the challenges we have, we currently only can contact us by telephone, which is 101 and 999. We did add some online reporting, but actually in the new year with single online home and some other digital initiatives we've got, we are trying to broaden that offering. I'm afraid we are behind on that, but we're very quickly trying to catch up, and some of our digital initiatives are helping us to do that. So I suppose on some of those, yes, and thank you for that, but and we're obviously very pleased. It's also worth highlighting that the 627,000 was one of the largest amounts received by a force of our size. I think actually it was. There's a lot. Manchester only got £1 million, for instance. So actually, it was testimony to the work that went in to that bid and our partners in terms of being involved. And forgive me making a joke. We said my office and Northamptonshire Police and others that were kind of involved, because fundamentally that's how you get money out of government, is actually demonstrating the partnership value of us all working together.
Who's holding the money?
I am.
Okay. Ian, did I miss you? Sorry. I
should probably say my office. I don't personally have a bank account with it in, just for clarity's sake.
Just a quick one, Chair, actually. We've talked a lot about drugs and what you're doing with the drugs and everything like that.
You mean the enforcement of drugs, not what I'm doing with drugs, for clarity's sake?
Can you give us a quick update on the illegal tobacco and alcohol? We've had, as you're aware, quite a few serious problems in the area. So if you could just give a quick update.
I don't have one I can give you right now.
Okay.
But probably what I should do is come back with one, because actually you'll be pleased to know Northamptonshire Police, and also, which really is the province of it, is the service funded, which has just gone out of my head at that moment in time. What's the service funded by the county that does? No, so not drugs. Licensing the. What's the department in the council? Trading standards, yes, I didn't hear. Trading standards, thank you. Works very closely, it went out of my head, working very closely with, I know, such an easy one, was working closely with trading standards to do it, because actually, and that does link together with some of the work that relates to kind of modern slavery, and some of the stuff that kind of sits on it. So, if you like, I'll come back with an answer on that one as an action, all right?
think if we can move on to the budget now, because otherwise we're getting a little bit. Sorry.
We've got 25 minutes for.
Oh, sorry, I think I've been told up with. Hang on a sec. Okay, quick last one.
This is to do with a quarterly force performance. Remember the question that I asked earlier on about performance? Would this paragraph 4.1 be included into these accountability board papers?
Yes.
Yes, yeah. I think, James, we need to
just to clarify, Chair. So the actions arising from that item are that the accountability board papers are going to be made available to the police and crime panel members as they're produced. The PCC was going to provide a report to the panel on the outcomes of the work that they're doing to review the use of stop and search, and off-agenda briefings were going to be provided on work in progress on updating digital contract arrangements and on work in relation to illegal tobacco and alcohol.
Just in on the 101, I actually think I'd made a note for myself. We'll also do an update for you on Pronto. Pronto is the new technology that allows cops to record crimes on their mobile devices when they're out and about, and we'll also demonstrate to you some of the capabilities that we're expecting to come out of our move to Click. Okay. So if I could just add them to the minutes, that'd be very useful.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, Chair, could you also talk about the seminar that you're going to pull together? That's really important. The seminar with regard to domestic
abuse.
Yeah,
that was earlier on, wasn't it?
So, what is the conclusion, the resolution from the panel, that it supports that it encourages that?
Okay.
In regards, because I sit on the Domestic Violence Forum for Kettering Corby, and also very heavily involved in Corby with it, it's really essential that we get these messages out now. There are big changes coming, and I think that we need to have that in place. We need to have that seminar, and we need to get all the boroughs and districts around that table so they've got a better understanding, because What we've got is a small amount of money of 30,000 can keep a refuge open. That refuge closes and they have to go into local authority housing. Could you imagine how much extra and how much extra the police are going to have to put in to actually protect these victims? So I think all of that needs to come to the table so that we can just sit down and say, this is your facts. You know, you go away and you don't listen to us, this is what it's going to cost you if you don't. Press practice, you don't be sitting here and hear the Crime Commission say, unfortunately, somebody's been murdered because they don't have a refuge. Thank you.
I think I won't name them, but some people in the room might know who I'm talking about. There was a council that actually fundamentally refused a £30,000 contribution at a recent council meeting. That they wouldn't put their money in because they didn't think it was necessary in their area, and we can't have that going on in and around the county. We all need to work and contribute.
At this time, with the unitary discussions going on, it would be make awareness across the board about it as a concern.
Can I just say, Chair, that Northampton Borough Council has just passed the motion to support the refugees. Not quite sure in what way, but it was me and my team that took the motion, and it was voted for. And my understanding that there'll be a meeting very soon to see what can be done from Northampton.
By the way, it wasn't your council that didn't vote against it.
Okay, if we can move on to the budget report, monitoring report, and if the I think Helen, are you going to do
I'll introduce it, and she can take all the difficult questions. Today's report sets out at a high level the revenue monitoring budget to, and I highlight to September, period 6, for the PCC managed budget, the force managed budget, and the capital financing. It also gives a forecast outturn to the 31st of March 2019. In addition to this report, we give financial update on the medium-term financial plan, financial outlooks and reserve levels. I just want to highlight that we are very efficient people, but we haven't already added the new information that we had an hour and a half before it came into this meeting. It sets out in detail the key variances within the budgets managed by the force, and a great deal of work has been done by the force and the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner to monitor spending, ensure the strict budgetary controls are maintained. It provides a great deal of detail, but we're happy to take questions. I would also particularly, and I'm not very that often that super nice to Helen, but I commend the work that she's done on coming into office. I can't tell you how difficult it was when I used to sit there and I had got two sets of figures, one from my office and one from the force, and they said completely different things. Now we at least have, me and the Chief have the same information and we're aware of them, and a large part of that is due to the work of Helen and Martin, so thank you.
Very glad to hear that we're getting joined up thinking. Okay. Did you want to introduce it first or yeah.
If I could, Madam Chairman, I'll just do very, very briefly because I know Mrs. Shields has got some questions for me as well. I know. If I could just give a few points in terms of the forecast outturn. When we sat before you in September, the force had highlighted a huge forecast outturn, I think it's fair to say, a huge forecast overspend at that point. They have managed to pull quite a lot of that back, but not all the way yet, so we will keep the pressure on, and we're still tightly managing their forecasts with them. At that time, the PCC had also highlighted a small underspend, and that underspend has increased significantly at this point. Now we're sitting in front of you. So whilst the force is over, the PCC is under, and there's a small overspend in this report, I definitely do believe that we will be expecting to balance the budget at year end. I have seen the October figures for the PCC, and there is a little bit more of an underspend, so it's heading in the right direction, Madam Chairman. So that's in terms of the forecast outturn. If I could just highlight a couple of things on the financial context, or before I get there, I have put in, as promised, more of an update on the Police and Crime Plan Delivery Fund that members asked for at the last meeting. And I know we'd be very, very happy to take any questions on that area. It's been a really, really popular budget for the PCC this year. We have no issues about spending that one. I think there are more requests coming into the PCC than there is currently money available. But that's really positive. It's helped start some good things or do a little bit of seed funding on some of the initiatives. Moving on to the financial context, it was quite grim when I wrote it, this report, I'm afraid. It was looking very grim and very dull. It was a very challenging time, and as the PCC has just highlighted, the provisional settlement has come out this lunchtime. So apologies if I seemed a little distracted in the beginning. I'm still reading through all the detail. It is more positive than the report highlighted. So the report highlighted some really challenging areas, particularly with regards to pensions. We have had some good news in that today, that the pensions will be funded. Mostly, and just to add a little bit more complexity that I don't quite understand today, there's also been a bit of a change at the Treasury in terms of another percentage that they will be funding as well. So I've got to work through that detail later on today, but that is good news. There is also good news in terms of the flexibility that's been given to PCCs. Last year, the PCC was told that he could, if he chose to, increase the precept for 2 years, up to £12 each year. This year, there is in the policing settlement an indication that should the PCC wish to, he could increase precept up to £24. I say should. It's not quite reflected in the council tax referendum documentation today. That's still saying £12. So there's a little bit of something to work through at government level there. But the other good bit of news is that some more grant has been allocated to policing as well. So actually it means that we've got to totally rework the medium-term financial plan and this part of the report that's in front of you today. It is positive. We've got to see what conditions and caveats that does come with, though, because there will be quite a few conditions and caveats that it brings.
And I just think on that, you know, in some respects we're probably deliberately being careful, but obviously we welcome the fact that government has listened to the representations that we've made and given some of the challenges that we face. So I'm trying to make sure that I do appear sufficiently positive, but also very carefully consider the option they've given us in terms of raising council tax, because whilst my job is to keep the people of Northamptonshire safe, it's also what I'm very conscious and I don't automatically assume that I would apply the full precept until I'm convinced that money would both be spent well, because I'm afraid that's money we've got to take off local taxpayers. Unless I can be absolutely certain that we can deliver extra value from, I'm not intending to take that money off them, and nor would I think anyone expect them. So we will go away and consider that carefully and come back to you at the February one.
Well, thank you very much. It's good to have that hot off the press, although I know there's always a lot of detail involved and you have to go and read the small print and you can't always tell exactly what's happening until you spend a bit of time on it. So thank you very much for that, especially with regard to pensions, which was a real worry about that one. But Mrs. Shields, did you? Baron, you have a lot of questions.
Yes. As I said to you earlier on, I do have quite a lot of questions. Now, obviously, from what you just say now, a lot of this information has been updated with new information, which, of course, I was not aware when I indicated my comments. One of the things is 3.10, key variance, items 9. Where you said that the business support transport costs have significantly increased due to additional vehicle hire and an additional vehicle technician. Could you explain a little bit what happened? Why is this not being originally in the initial budget?
I think that's a very good question. I do know that the new operational model that's not quite so new now, the service delivery model, some of the areas that hadn't necessarily been fully thought through was the impact on the vehicle requirements that were needed from that policing model. That's come to light as the year has gone on, so not as much was built in the budget in vehicle costs as it should have been for 18-19. I can assure you that that's been picked up and put right in the draft budget forecast for 19-20.
Okay, thank you very much. The second question...
You just turned it off. Sorry.
Yeah. The second question is the collaboration unit. The good things about this paragraph is that a review has been undertaken as a zero-based budget, which I'm very happy, because otherwise you would pick up some information from previous things and then the budget become really nonsensical. My question is on the overspend. Is this still the result of 725k related to multi-force share service, MFSS? You're saying that this cause has been mainly the cause for Avon and Somerset not to join the collaboration. If there has been service level agreements right from the outset that these two organizations were to participate and then at a later stage change their mind, should the charge be made back to them for the refund?
If I can deal with that in two parts, and I'll let the Commissioner come in for the second part, if that's okay. The 725,000 was the last forecast overspend we have from the Management Board. The Management Board reviews the detailed budget information before it goes to the Shared Services Joint Operating Committee that Stephen chairs. And I can tell you that historically the information coming to that board has been absolutely poor. It has got much, much better over the past few months, and the individual who's got oversight on that is really getting a grip on the information in the budget. So I'm much more comfortable with the information that's now in there. I don't want to sound too optimistic, but I do feel that 725,000 might reduce slightly. We've had an initial forecast which looks like that could drop. I really don't want to be too optimistic for you here today. My next report will highlight that, because that will be definitely the case. It would have been worked through in a bit more detail, but we do expect that to drop slightly. Not as much as we would like, though, in this financial year. In terms of the impact of Avon and Somerset coming on or not joining the collaboration, that's where, if you don't mind, Stephen, I'll pass over to you.
One of the wonderful jobs about this job is that I fully accept on coming into office that everything's my fault. And this seems like one of those. I would probably have, so MFSS is something I inherited. I became the chairman of it. I didn't step back fast enough, I think, when some people, it became particularly challenging. And actually was a particular challenge between two of the other forces that were involved, and I was the trusted peaceful candidate, if you like. I suppose the first thing is, what is MFSS? As I mentioned earlier, it's 4 forces. It was going to move to 5. The uncertainty over the implementation of Oracle Fusion and some of the challenges that we've had with that took Avon and Somerset to be in a difficult position that they were not certain that the deadlines could be met. So in terms of contractually, where's the fault lie? So much so I met with the Cabinet Office to apply pressure to Oracle to make sure that they delivered on their elements in terms of the contract. Maybe we were also a bit too quick to take those and put them in our budgets on the basis that Avon and Somerset will definitely join when they're not. I can assure you that there's a more robust, with both me as a chairman, supported by Martin and Helen, and also some of the other members, that everyone's leaning in to make sure it gets delivered. As Helen's talked there is we are delivering a new ERP that needs to go live for the 1st of April for MFSS. At this moment in time, you know, it's a high probabilities. I'd probably 85 to 90, but that's not 100%. And when you're delivering a major IT project on that basis, this kind of inherently kind of has risk. So we'll provide more information to you on that as we get it. But it's probably that it wouldn't be unfair to say it's one of the biggest risks we're managing right now. We will get there. But my very big concern, if they don't deliver in April, I'll give you some idea. The additional licensing cost between the four forces like £750,000 a month, and sadly. £750,000 a month. That's split between four forces. So there is there's another £500,000 worth of risk if they don't hit the thing of April, because it's not then we can go, oh, I tell you what, I'll put it on the 1st of May, because actually then we're into audit territory and actually moving your ERP. I think I look at you. I think we've probably got to stay on it for another 3 months or something, haven't we? We can't move from an audit perspective. So there is some big risks. You're right to highlight it, and part of the reason it's in there. The one thing I would say, I'm not just saying it because collectively everyone's lent input resources, it's probably in one of the I'm more confident than I've ever been, and I probably wasn't very confident before. Doesn't mean I'm jumping for joy, but actually we're close to a thing. But again, the same problem. And why is it so complex? You know, you've got that many people in there. You know, their ability to then track over time, pay all of these people. It's that volume stuff that you're paying. Suppliers and all this, we can't afford for it to fail. We cannot. You know, so in some respects, if we're not 110% certain, then I'm afraid it might cost more money. But considering Northamptonshire Police alone spends £10 million a month keeping its community safe, the collective spend from the four forces is something like £60 million a month. So just in terms of payroll, £500,000 sounds like a lot of money, and that'd be our share probably of the 3 months. I'd rather pay the money than not have a problem and not pay cops who are hard working out there trying to keep people safe.
To add to your comment, does it mean that part of this new due diligence that you have made, you also have drafted some new contract, or has been the contract done nationally to meet, you know?
One of the things, as chairman, one of the things I've been, the best way I can describe it is it's not structured in a way that I'm happy with. It's currently structured essentially with what they call a Section 22, which is the way forces cooperate with each other. Now, for me, it should be an entity in its own right. It should not be a cooperative in that way, because actually that's where stuff has the capacity to fall through the gap. So actually, there's the problem between Avon and Somerset. It's, if you like, they had to contract with all the entities. Add to that the management control of it wasn't what it should be. One of the things that I've said, and I set out 4 principles, and I can't remember all of them right now, that I wanted to see on becoming chairman. One of them was to hire a new head. The person that's in it has now left. We're looking for a new head, and actually it should be structured appropriately to make sure that, you know, the appropriate governance and stuff that's in there. And quite frankly, if that's not agreed, Northamptonshire Police will not be staying in it.
Can I just add that is this something that the audit committee is very hot on as well? So, you know, we're not the only ones that are overseeing this. So I think it will get a lot of oversight. I think, Richard, you have.
Thank you, and thank you, Ms. Shields, for you're very good with figures, which is not my great subject. This is a question I know a commissioner I've asked before, and subsequent and previous commissioners and chief constables, but it goes to the very heart of keeping the community safe. So do we yet know how many cops, PCSOs and staff that we actually need to keep Northamptonshire safe? And if there is a shortfall, do we intend to use any extra monies to recruit the required staff?
It doesn't work, does it? In answer to that question, it's no. And why don't we know? Because to be honest, and you know this more than most, it's quite dynamic. I suppose in some respects, on coming into office, the force couldn't tell me how many cops and people it had got. Through some of the work that we've got to, I'm more confident than ever that I know that number. So they're not even, even knowing some of the, you asked quite rightly a question about why weren't some of those things included. With Helen, modest Helen here, and the recruitment of some new people in the force, the finance functions have been strengthened. And I think what this kind of what's really happened here is what a number of years ago some artificial targets were set to say we have to keep hold of police officers, and I think too deep a cut were made in the enabling services, and we've been paying for that now, if that makes sense. And that's also why I'm keen to bring together police and fire to actually make sure that we share those without, if you like, it creates that additional investment without making a large of saving then in the front line that you've got to put into the back line. So I don't want to terrify anyone, sort of say that we're not counting our beans properly now, because we definitely are. And actually I think each iteration of budget has been much better that I've now set, and the one that we're about to set I can do with a lot more confidence than I've ever done. Can I tell you that every penny is being spent as wisely as it should be right now? No. But can I tell you we're getting much better at, and will we get much better at it? Absolutely. And that's what the HMIC, efficiency reports in terms of it is. I do think we have a much better understanding of our demand than we've ever done before. But can I actually tell you how many we need exactly? No, we can't. But we have a much better idea than we've ever done. But of course, it also changes depending on where you put your priorities. As we've talked about earlier, I think we've pulled back into high harm, and we haven't taken a good enough focus on many of the stuff you've identified there. Have we low-level drug dealing, antisocial behaviour, have we done a good enough job in those areas? No. And of course you need, if you like, even more to do it. And to be fair, some of these questions I intend to seek to answer for you, will give you comfort when I bring forth the budget proposals for February.
Yeah, thank you. Just a supplementary on that. I do find it difficult to understand that we can stick objects on Mars, and to think that we haven't got sufficient intellect within the university or within the office to actually work out a rough formula how many cops, PCSOs and staff we need is, my head doesn't accept that. And the other issue is, if we don't know how many cops, etc., we need, what are we petitioning government for? Because surely we need to petition government to say, look, this is the analysis, this is our need, and this is what we need to keep the community safe. And I'm just wondering where I just can't believe that we haven't got a rough figure based on our priorities at the moment.
I suppose, and the reason I kind of just highlight, so let's just take the last weekend. How could we have planned for some idiot who thought it was fun to go out dressed as a terrorist, take off his I'm trying to use words because everyone's public here, and take off his fancy dress, that's the word I'm looking for, and leave it overnight in a bin that then we look like we've got a terrorist bomb stuck in thing. How can we anticipate that? How can we anticipate that we've got two thugs get into a fight in the middle of Kettering, one punches the other one and causes them to die, or two people drive off the motorway and use our road network to go and abuse a 50-plus lady in Kiln Walgrave? The problem is, it's kind of the reason that I'm being overly simplistic. Human nature and some of the things we do. That the accountant that gets, I'm not picking on accountants, that's had a bad day and gets home and has a fight with his wife. I suppose in some respects there is in terms of human nature. the simple fact is, you know, 2,088 people protecting 741,000. All we've got is kind of historic. At the moment, we've had unprecedented effects in terms of, but a lot of work is being done in that area, and I'm happy to share with some of the submissions that we're putting together in terms of government. But actually, you know, it's people that are involved and what they do and don't do, I suppose.
I think if we can move on to the precept, because that, you know, because we've obviously got still a few bits to go and we've got the hearing afterwards. So, you know, and the precept is going to be how much money we need or you're going to ask for. So in a way, it sort of brings on these questions as well. Sorry, if we can just move on to the precept. Yeah, Anita, if we could just move on to the precept, and then we could. If we could just let Stephen say about the precept, and then we can have your question then.
I'll answer your question in a minute. Come on. I suppose, firstly, so item 8, we've obviously seen the thing. I suppose the bit I really want to say that I'm proud of the work that we've done to highlight the funding model is fair and equitable. So actually, at the moment, you know, we've in our submissions have been around policing in Northamptonshire relative to kind of other people. And to give you some idea of some of the challenges in the funding formula, the previous funding formula talks about how many bars you've got in square miles. And actually, we've often argued that it has to have a, given the point I was making earlier, Richard, that actually it needs to have a greater relationship between the number of people that you're doing. It needs to take into account deprivation and all of those sorts of things. So I am pleased on one level that the government's given great flexibility to PCCs to raise more money through the precept. But I also think that there needs to be more support for a fairer funding model for here in Northamptonshire compared to other. And I don't think, by the way, that that's just policing alone. I actually think it affects our local government. I also think it affects health, that actually, because we're a great place to live. So we've done a lot of work on it. I'm having some discussions with the Chief Constable about what additional resources he might or might not need, what that needs to look like. I don't wish to prejudge them. We obviously will be very specific about what we intend to do with it. The nice thing is it does put the money and the decision here in Northamptonshire, which are very much welcome, but I'm sure you appreciate. It's also given me not an easy one. Like I said, I don't want to ask the people of Northamptonshire for any more than I have to, but at the same time, I want to make sure that they are kind of kept safe, and that's kind of difficult for me given the situation that we find ourselves. But broadly, I think the term I used, I'm cautiously optimistic about the funding situation it's good, and the government has recognised through the work that we've done. But I'm happy to take some questions if anyone's got any thoughts.
Just a quick question. Are you planning to bring two separate precepts for fire and police, or one together?
I'm glad you asked me. Legally, that is exactly what we're going to do, and it has to be so. So at this moment in time, police appears as a separate line on a council tax bill. Currently, fire does not. It's included in the county. But the money that's currently charged for the fire service will come out of the county. And it will now be shown separate. Fire money needs to be spent on fire, and police money needs to be spent on police. There is some room, particularly, as I mentioned earlier, and I'll talk a little bit more about enabling services and something we're trying to do on that. But actually, it's important that we, if you can, are as efficient as possible. I think I said it just from a policing point of view. 79.6% of our money is spent on frontline policing. Actually, we need to be the highest possible we can. Now, broadly, that's where around the rest of the country is. I actually think by working closer with fire, we do get that opportunity to both keep jobs here in Northamptonshire and make sure that our resources are in Northamptonshire, but also allows us some efficiencies. We will also, and I very much welcome, we're even having some preliminary conversations with new authorities to see, can we share buildings? How can we be as efficient as we possibly can under the kind of one estate to make those buildings available? So actually any money we do ask people for is absolutely spent in the right way. But to be clear, yes, there will be 2 lines on there separately. We don't actually have the, I don't know if you found it yet. We were having trouble finding the fire settlement. I don't know if we've had it yet.
I haven't.
3%.
Yes, so it's 3% referendum limit. Yeah.
Yeah, 2.99, which is the maximum. So I can tell you right now that to stabilise it, that would be my expectation, that we will raise it by 2.99 for fire. Police still need to take some time to consider.
Okay. I think, Anita, you've got one, and Mary, if we try and keep it to just a few questions this time.
I have 2 short questions. One is about the discounted rate and the impact it will do on the budget, because, of course, you have mentioned clearly that there is going to be an increase in budget force for the police officer. Instead of paying at 24.2, it will go up to 33.9, and equally with the fire and rescue, it will go from 22.9 to 24. So these are the pressure in which the budgets keep going on and on. And my second question is also linked to your reserve. The reserve on 21, now that is 2021, Northamptonshire will be 6% against national 6.3. It is frightening to see that after that, what's going to happen? I mean, 2021 is not that far away. And then I want to know if you have any thought on that.
Thank you, Mrs. Shields. Yes, in terms of the discount rate, yes, it's been an extreme shock, I think it's fair to say, that when the police and the fire pension schemes were reviewed, that there was such a big change in the discount rate. And this is one of the elements. In terms of policing, it was expected to cost an extra £417 million per year. I'm delighted to say that most of that seems to have been addressed in today's provisional settlement from Grant. Okay, most of that. Not all, got to work through the detail, but most of that has been addressed. Originally, policing were going to have to find 165 million, with the Treasury finding the rest. But today, it seems like most of the whole amount will be met. After this year, though, it's a real... it has to go into the comprehensive spending review for both policing and fire. So whilst we know that it will be funded mainly in 1920, it all depends on what the comprehensive spending review is agreed for policing and fire after that. And I know local authority colleagues also have those challenges. So yes, in the prudent way, we include the worst in the forecast, Mrs. Shields, and we really, really hope, like today, that the grant comes out slightly better. In terms of the reserves, I think this is where the PCC and I have a professional, healthy tension and debate sometimes. I would...
More reserves than me.
Yeah, I would like the reserves to be higher, and definitely by 2021 I feel that is too low. If that is where we're heading towards, I feel that is too low. We will absolutely meet all of the accountancy requirements in terms of the general reserves and the insurance reserves, but as you see, by 2021 there's nothing else left for innovation, transformation, to smooth the pattern of up and down funding settlements. So we will continue that conversation, the PCC and I will still be pushing for slightly more in reserves over time, but not at the expense of the precept. And obviously we will review it in terms of the comprehensive spending review when that comes up as well. Okay.
Would you like me to comment on both of those, if I may? The first one is just actually, and it's way above my pay grade, but you know, Northamptonshire Police spends, I think it's in excess of 11 towards £12 million worth on its pension contributions. You know, that's a significant proportion of its budget. As people live longer, that continues to potentially could grow in terms of the rate. And like I said, it's above my pay grade, and I'm in no way trying to infer that government needs to do something about it, but there needs to be a recognition that the contribution, I'm not prepared to go and ask the people of Northamptonshire to pay more money to go into other people's pensions. So there needs to be a recognition of what that actually means. It doesn't mean they're not hard-working individuals and that they don't deserve that for all people in terms of the public sector. But the simple fact is people are living much longer, and actually what they can expect needs to be paid for in some way. Like I said, way above my grade, but if we're not careful and we carry on, you'll end up with the absurd situation that a third of your budget is going on pension contributions and not in service. Now, I know we're some years off that, but I would rather encourage them to make decisions about that kind of much earlier.
Stephen, if I can interrupt,
I'm going to be very quickly then,
because we are mindful of the time.
All right, my very quick one, just on reserves, just so you don't think we're falling out. There should be a healthy tension between us. Quite rightly, we need to make sure we've got sufficient reserves to do it. But at the same time, in difficult times, I don't want to be in a position that I'm asking local taxpayers, unless absolutely necessary, for money that they're then not going to see an effect and or a present as a consequence of it. But it's a healthy tension that should be there.
Okay, I think we might just move on now, if that's okay. We had next item was the approach to legal traveller encampments. Now the question was put by Councillor Eales, who he's not here and his substitute is now left as well. But I think because the force... Well, yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, because you've just released a new leaflet very helpfully, which actually Councillor Butcher has even got a copy of there. I think it's probably made this question, less...
Shall I give you a 30-second answer?
Okay.
Following on from the Police and Crime Panel and Chief Constable, and I had a conversation. So he commissioned a review of the force's use of Section 61 powers, which are police powers to evict from unauthorised encampments. The refreshed policy, of which I've written to you all on and have a leaflet that explains, places emphasis on all officers to be fully aware of their powers and the scope of the legislation, and covers the policing response from report through to conclusion. The longer-term plan is to gain a greater understanding of the impact of unauthorised encampments in areas that are disproportionately affected, to better focus police and partner powers to protect land and balance it. Because I think that's one of the key things. It's not a policing response alone. Whilst policing powers to evict from must be balanced and proportionate, the refreshed policy focuses on the general use of land on which the unauthorised encampment is based, so that if the land is primarily used for public amenity, there should be a presumption towards the use of powers of eviction due to the disproportionate effect that this has on the settled community. The policy also clearly covers a clear direction to ensure that peripheral ASB and criminality associated with unauthorised encampment is investigated and dealt with consistently and appropriately. The policy has been subject to legal compliance checking and has been signed off by the Chief Constable. Members of public partners should be assured that Northamptonshire Police is committed to reducing the impact of unauthorised encampments across the county in accordance with the legislation and ethical principles of fairness and equality.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And
James, do you want my piece of paper?
Yes, please.
I thought you might. I was like,
it's really helpful.
He'll email it to you, save you even writing it down.
Really helpful that you've addressed that situation. Can we
have it recorded? This is a great piece of work and supports all of the authorities within the county. I've been fighting for this for the last 3 years, writing to the Minister and, asking for a review of the policy, and it's great to see this is coming out from the Chief Constable and the Officer of the PCC.
Yeah.
So let's have it recorded as a
Thank you
great
very
piece
much.
of work.
Yes, I'm sure we can do that.
Is that a conclusion by the panel as a whole?
Everyone happy to approve that? Yes. Okay. Okay, so we just move quickly to the work programme. You've had it set out in the paper. There's a few items at the bottom that say about fire and early intervention coming back, etc., at various times. Is everyone happy that everything that's recorded there that needs to come back?
Then there'll be some, through you, Chair, there'll clearly be some additions from the current meeting.
Yes, yeah, okay. But otherwise, I think, we've covered everything over there. We're obviously mindful of the fact that we're running a bit late, but I do think that we perhaps could manage a little comfort break before starting the hearing, if that's all right. Yeah. Okay, hopefully we will be finished by then. Yeah, absolutely, yeah, okay. Okay. Right, cool. To be filmed, so.
No.
Just, if we just ask James to explain that part about the privacy, etc.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, obviously, as with the previous meeting, we have apologies for non-attendance from Councillors King and Larratt and Councillor Eales. So the process for carrying out the confirmation hearing is as set out pages 6 and 7 of the report. Clearly, in this case, the Commissioner is proposing 2 appointments to the position of Chief Executive on a shared basis. So the process it's proposed to follow is a modification of the standard process that the panel has used in the past, intended to reflect that. In brief, it's intended that you invite the Commissioner to comment on the background to both of the proposed appointments, the case for the reorganisation of the OPCC that the appointments reflect, and then take any questions from panel members that there are on that. So deal with the generic aspects of the proposed approach. The candidates will then be questioned by the panel along the standard lines used for confirmation hearings in the past in alphabetical order. So Mr Bullen first, and Ms Marzak will be invited to withdraw from the hearing whilst that takes place. Once all of the questions have been asked and answered, and the candidate has an opportunity to ask any questions they have, the first candidate will then be asked to withdraw, and the process will be repeated with Ms Marzak. Then, at the conclusion of the second candidate's questioning, the panel will be asked to agree a resolution to go into private session to reach its conclusions on the proposed appointments. Again, that's an entirely standard process followed for confirmation hearings. The only difference in this case is that it needs to reach 2 recommendations rather than the 1. The panel's recommendations will be captured in a report that will be sent to the Commissioner by the end of the working day tomorrow, and then arrangements for the panel's report and the Commissioner's response and final decision to be published will be agreed in coordination with the Commissioner. The possible outcomes of the review are set out at paragraph 6.2, page 8. So, again, to emphasise, Chair, the approach being followed for the confirmation hearing is based as far as possible on the standard approach used by the panel in the past, modified to reflect the joint proposed appointments at the meeting today. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you very much. Well, just quickly, on the agenda, we have notifications to requests to members of the public, but I believe we have none. Declaration of members' interest, just as before. So I'd just like to welcome both of the candidates, Mr. Pullen and Ms. Martek. And I mean, my instructions say that everyone should introduce themselves. I don't know if you feel that's necessary. If not, we'll cut that one out. James already explained the background and how it will run. So, Stephen, if you'd like to tell us what you have in mind.
Up to. Yes, I think it's important to think. So the first bit is, as you know, from next month I assume the responsibility for police and fire. So there are the kind of 2 elements in here. One, continually take a look at how we as an office are operating. Are there any kind of opportunities to save money? But I think that it's important to understand that, so both of those 2 elements are critical to why I come forward with this proposal. And the first piece really is, while we talked a lot about kind of efficiencies, back office and dealing with Purple, it creates a real opportunity for us to bring a number of functions together. But and I looked at options of, bringing someone else in. I'm not one of those that particularly likes to bring consultants in. I like people that you can kind of trust and people that you can actually know that potentially kind of go on and lead it. And actually, given that Martin particularly has led on, for me, on some particularly important governance changes, also working with me around the estates for the saving of Wootton Hall and on the estate strategy. So there's a sort of peculiar situation that the Police and Crime Commissioner formally owns all the buildings and all of the assets and vehicles. Actually, I've always been concerned that those disproportionately should be better connected to kind of operational delivery. So it kind of gives me that opportunity to bring those things together. So what I want to see created, and we put together a number of options, is, if you like, a purple function. Now, that might end up being a holistic, it might be a formal entity, but I also want to dispel any rumours, because there was 5 options put before me. One of them, things stayed the same. So we had 2 HR, we had 2 finance, we had 2 sets of vehicle maintenance. That's not in the best interest of the people of Northamptonshire or in terms of money. The other one was to outsource it or privatise it. You'll be pleased to know I completely ruled that. I don't think emergency service, someone should be making profit out of delivering that. So I very much, and there was a third that's going to come, that's gone straight out of my head, that will come back in a few moments. But all I'm interested in is looking to say, right, how can we bring those together, whether it be in a combined function or actually, if you like, in a management team that's done it. So Martin had the unique skill set that he both available. So I just want to dispel something that Richard said to me earlier. Martin's not leaving the organisation. If you like, he's taking on a very important role for us. He has the confidence of the 2 chiefs to actually go on and both formulate what that response to Purple looks like. In the first instance, I've said, it needs to include HR, finance, vehicle maintenance, communications, also ICT, and did I say vehicle maintenance? Yeah. And there's another one that's at me off the top of my head. But literally those ones that are very clearly things that should occur. There is some stuff around resource and planning that might come in later, potentially training, but we want to focus on those elements. Look at the best of where it's been done in other parts of the country. We also have the benefit, you know, we talked about some of our underspends. Some of our underspends have come as a consequence of how long it's taking us to recruit. So actually it's something I think we need to get on sooner rather than later. And I ran the risk of going, well, let's say we hire somebody and you're kind of like, well, it'll take us a few months to find them, that'll take us a few months to vet them, whereas actually in this instance, by coming up with this, I reduced the cost of my office. I, if you like, then port Martin to the force and the service to make sure that he works on creating that with all the necessary knowledge he's got. I'm not presupposing it. My hope and ambition is that he genuinely goes on to lead that service when it's created, because I want to see something made. But there obviously needs to be an appropriate recruitment process and all time of that. So that's why I came up with the time frame of 18 months. Then at the same time, I was actually talking to the PCC in Cumbria, and they said they'd come up with this new model where actually theirs was to do with a retirement, that they had distilled down the function of the chief exec, because actually the legislation currently says that I have to have a chief exec, but actually it doesn't quite say that. It needs, I need a monitoring officer and a head of paid service. So what I wanted to make sure to do is we distilled those functions out, and what I have is a strong team of directors, not only in Nikki and Paul, but also in Helen and Paul Fell. So actually, if you like, they're the ones that do all the great work and make me look good. So thank you for that. So actually, it's a timely thing that we're going to do an 18-month trial of this. They did it for a year, by the way, in Cumbria, and formalised it. So if you like, the more generic responsibilities fall to the directors anyway, but very much the two responsibilities of head of paid service and monitoring officer fall to them in 6-month rotation. So just to explain, hopefully that explains the background to it. So it gives me the opportunity that we've then not gone out, and I'm not gone out and spend extra money on some consultant or someone else buying it. I've reduced the cost of my office. I've got someone in terms of knowledge. So for me, it seems very much a no-brainer. It's also quite timely because I've worked with Nikki, Paul and Helen for some time now, so I've got a settled team. It creates the opportunity for both them to grow, and also it's two people in which I already have trust. But I obviously, following the correct procedure, bring it to you. Although, as you can understand, it's not quite in the true exec. If you like, you're almost testing them against the monitoring officer and the head of paid service element of it. So, you know, that might, I don't know what's in your interview questions, but there might bring some nuance to it in terms of the elements to that. So we retain the corporate knowledge. It saves £100,000 a year that then goes into frontline policing on the back of it. Which I think can only be good, because you know, we don't know some of the challenges that are also going to come down in terms of fire. I have worked with both of them. Can't commend them strongly enough. Otherwise, I wouldn't be sat here with both of them. So happy to take questions on the thing, and then I'll let you get to them.
Quickly about this 100,000 saving. Obviously, Martin's not leaving the service or your office. How is that 100,000 saving? Who's paying for him?
So it's a saving on the Office of the Police and Crime Commission, but also it's 100,000 that I know it might sound odd, but it's not extra money I've had to find to invest in a new post to save it, if you see what I mean. If you sense, in a sense, the total number of money hasn't changed, the total number of people hasn't changed. However, the original business case on my desk involved us either other PFCCs have brought in consultants to write them the reports on it. I wanted to come up with something that says, do you know what, whatever we create, you know, whatever he comes forth with, I want him to own the problem. If you know, I say the problem. So it genuinely is about, if you like, it's a saving in the Office of the Police and Crime Commission that moves down there. So it's some money that I won't have spent. It reduces the size of my office. It reduces a layer of management, which means, you know, good and bad folks, we get to work together even closer. Thankfully, they didn't make faces at that point.
So basically, he'll be paid by the force and the...
Well, essentially, I'm porting the money to the force from me, yes.
Yeah, so it's just coming out of your office.
Yes, it's coming. I'm still, in the end, it's all my money, isn't it? But my office essentially shrinks and the money is going to policing.
Okay.
And fire.
Okay. Mrs. Shields.
This was a question that I asked yesterday from James, and I asked specifically that I raise a question about this report, because you say that you have based your model from Cumbria, but Cumbria has only one town, Carlisle. Northamptonshire is much, much bigger. You've got Towcester, you've got Corby, you've got Wellingborough, etc. And I don't think that the model that you say is to be copied. Why you have not selected Lincolnshire, for instance, or Leicestershire to actually base your model? You may say to me, well, the chief executive function is not represented in Leicestershire or Lincolnshire, and that is the reason why you went in Cumbria. What I was very concerned is on paragraph A3, where you said the current salary. I've read this report at least 4 times, and the first question I thought to myself, where is Martin Scoble into that? Because I saw Martin Scoble being redundant and you replacing him with 2 people who have different set skill, who would be completing your flowchart. Now, I went to dig out the flowchart of the OPCC from 2017, where you show the chief constable and you have the 4 directors, 2 for delivery, 1 for digital, and 1 for the early intervention, this one. Yeah? If you recall, at that time, I said that I was very interested to have a flowchart because it really shows, you know,
if we can
how the structure is done.
Answer a question.
Yeah, just a moment, please. You state as well in your report that your structure will be flat. But as I see it like a pyramid scale. So my question on A3 is that the current salary of chief executive is PMG 7. I don't know what the value of that. And then you say that the 2 that is proposed, each director, blah, 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 spinal point PM 7, 5. I don't know the value of that. What I really would like, for me, I don't know about anybody else, that you provide me some transparency about that 100,000 saving. Because I don't doubt what you say, but I'm representing the public, and I would like for me to...
Just disagree with you, actually. I'm representing the public, and actually you're there to hold me to account. I'm happy to answer that question, and I'll provide you the transparency.
Yeah, okay, yes. Because what I'm looking here is that you're stating, like I say, a spinal point plus an initial cost plus an honorarium for the statutory role.
Can we get Stephen to answer it, please? Yeah, he said he will answer it. Yeah.
So the PMG 7 with on costs, so the chief executive salary of the OPCC, and actually, you know, it's interesting you mentioned Lincolnshire. So Martin earns about 20,000. The PCC, the chief executive of Lincolnshire, earns £140,000 per year. Not something I felt was a good value for the taxpayer. Leicestershire. Actually, I don't know what the person earns there. I only reference Cumbria as a model to say it has worked somewhere else. To be honest, this is new. There is a saving, so you know the combined salary of Martin and his on cost is roughly £120,000. Okay. there will be a slightly, if you like, I'm asking these people to do more work, not just these two, but also Helen and Paul more work. So I am flattening the structure to, if you like, take that money and then give it to the entities of police and fire. So I'm demonstrating to you that there is £100,000 saving from the 120, because it will cost me, I think it's 18 off the top of my head, more with this structure in terms of asking them to do more, to do the extra work, because I don't actually think it's fair for me to ask them to take on the extra responsibility and the extra work and not ask them to do more, because actually they're going to have to work harder and we as the public get a benefit from that. Now, I hope that answers that one. Cumbria, the actual other fours, they're fractionally smaller than us, but I think I don't know their exact budget. I think it might be 110, 120 million. They're actually smaller than us, but actually it's just around governance and in terms of the size of the force.
Okay, Richard, I think you had a question.
Yeah, I was. This is a difficult one for me. I can see the logic in what you're doing, and I'm all about common sense, logic, pragmatism. But I also can see how the perception that it may have from an outsider's point of view. Bearing in mind the process that Martin went through to actually get into that position, to then recruit from within. With I'm not too sure whether it was a competitive process, or whether people could just be made temporary or acting like they do in the service rather than have to be appointed. I'm not too sure about whether that was an option for you. So you must have looked at how this might be perceived outwardly with regard to. Do you want to share what your thoughts were and how you still feel comfortable to proceeding? Not saying that the two people aren't great candidates, I don't personally know them, but I'm just thinking about the process that Martin went through and the two candidates are going through, and there appears to be an imbalance. And so how do you feel comfortable?
That's me. We'll keep going backwards and forwards. I don't recognise the bit about the imbalance. I think actually the public at the high level are going to go, actually the Commissioner is coming up with a solution that's going to save them £100,000 a year, that's actually going towards, and if you like, I'm taking it in simple terms, that money out of my office and I'm giving it over here to police and fire. What they want to make sure is the things that were still going on in my office are being done. I would remind you that this is an 18-month trial, so actually this is not a permanent one for me to, and then maybe that got lost in there. So it's an 18-month trial for me to look at it, and either myself as Commissioner will review when I come back, should I come back, or the new Commissioner will determine the structure that they need. As I think I've said, it's not something I would do if I hadn't worked with these individuals, because you've also got to make sure that they can work together, because the sharing of information becomes more critical when they hand over in terms of those elements. So actually there will be a review at the end of the 18 months, and that's also why I took the Cumbria experience, because they did a trial for a year and then they took it up. I fully accept that it's new and it's innovative. And to be honest, I've got some people that are not, as you're quite right saying to me, that you're not completely comfortable with it. Obviously I am, otherwise I wouldn't have brought it forward, but actually I think that saving to the public is important. I do believe in the individuals and the structure I'm putting in place, that actually I still believe we will be as efficient, if at times we might be more efficient because we will have a slightly flatter structure because we're taking a tier out of it. But it's an 18-month trial and we will come back and review it at the end of it. I hope that answers.
Can I just ask, because the monitoring officer is asking me that really need to ask this question.
She can answer some questions about what the monitoring officer does.
Have you taken advice, sort of HR advice, I suppose, and legal advice, on whether these posts should have been advertised and a proper recruitment procedure followed? Because normally public funded posts are sort of open and transparent process.
Yes, I took independent HR advice to make sure that we looked at it. It's a temporary, if you like, situation that occurs over 18 months. At the moment I've only got 2. I may even have one of the other directors come before you at some point. So I'm following the procedure. I think actually in terms of bits, and this sounds more bombastic than it kind of needs to. Even if you reject it, I could appoint them. I'm not trying to do that. That's not something I want to do. I'm deliberately bringing it here so that actually it gets the necessary public scrutiny than it actually it needs. Okay. So I'm deliberately, if you like, giving it the full glare of publicity, so you get to ask me those questions, because you're right. Cumbria advice, which they took a lot more legal advice than I did, but I spoke to their lawyers on how they did it, was also the PCC could just have appointed because it was temporary and you didn't need to bring it to the panel. So if you like, I'm going over and above in terms of openness, so that's why I'm more confident and more comfortable that I think it's the right thing to do.
I think we're just trying to make sure it's a legal thing. Sorry, Richard.
So I did have a supplementary, and that was about that you could have just done a temporary post.
Yes.
So you could have just done, and the question is, why don't you just do a temporary post? Why are you looking for our almost blessing upon it? Because of course it is. I'd have just made him temporary inspector, and see how it's gone.
I said, look, it is public money. Don't get me wrong. I want to shout about the opportunity that I'm transferring £100,000 from my office to the force, and you're giving me the opportunity to remind you of that, however many times I can, in front of the press. And also, we're not then incurring. We're not bringing. In my job, you never win, do you? I'm not bringing in consultants. I'm not bringing in expensive people to write reports. I'm working with the people that I'm used to working with, and they have to convince you that they have the necessary skills to fulfil those two additional functions. That's an outside endorsement. Why wouldn't I want to do that?
I'm just reminded by James that a couple of our members need to leave shortly. Okay, and we have a quorum of 5. So can we just perhaps...
I am, but
I would just like to ask Steve something, because you've mentioned something, and Steve mentioned something, and that is about the legality of recruitment, the law as it is. Did you say that you did not advertise because, of course, these 2 individual candidates are really within the organization, and that's why you didn't advertise the post? All I'm saying is that normally, if it is an interim post, the organization is duty-bound to recruit, even so that you are going to probably take them. As far as the law in HR is that you have to put the post for tender, for the public.
I think we need to try and do this very quickly, please.
I'm quite comfortable that I am complying with HR, the law, and actually, my duty to make sure that I appropriately spend public money. Otherwise, I wouldn't be sat here in front of you. Why would I don't mean it to be rhetorical. Why would I take that risk? I'm 18 months from an election. I could just have left it. But I actually thought it was more it was better use of public money, and will get us a better result quicker by actually going down this road. Because actually, you're right, the same challenge occurs over things. Because to be honest with you, you're right, I could just hire a consultant, pay them 200 grand a year, it's well within my thing. I don't even need to bring that to you. But actually, I don't think that's the, I don't mean that to be in a challenging way, but I don't genuinely believe that's the right thing to do. I believe Martin will give me a better result in purple, and I'm putting forward with you 2 individuals who I trust. And because I've worked with them, I'm prepared to do this. If I was going down the recruitment route, I would not have gone down this road, because I don't know, A, that they could work together, and actually as a team, they need to function both with me and also with each other. And it's only now, some of the people I inherit, there's no way I would dare have done this. So.
Okay, I think we need to move on. Mary, is it very quick? Yeah.
Can I just ask that we do move on with this? The last PCC spent a fortune on staff when we were trying to cut that staff back. We've got a PCC here that's trying to save public money.
Okay.
So we've discussed this, no offence, for what, 20 minutes, where we could actually be getting on with the job and just getting somebody recruited into the position. Let's just, and I'm sorry to agree with you because this is going against my great tradition. But we have actually just talked about something really. Let's trust them to do it.
Yeah, we're all agreeing, Mary, so let's move on. Yeah, could I just ask Nikki to please withdraw? Sorry, you know, we need to move on to the formal bit, and we have some questions to ask of Paul. Is it Paul or Mr. Bullen? I'm not sure. We're on first name terms. Okay, so I'm asking the first question. How do you describe your approach to leadership? Sorry, a couple of our members have to leave. And management, and how will you go about applying it in the role?
Okay, so I would describe my style of leadership as both visionary and also trying to lead by example as well. So I suppose there is a degree of what I do in terms of leading any people who I am trying to lead that is about setting a strategic vision for where we need to get to and empowering them then to go on and deliver that. But equally, I'm not someone who gives the bad jobs to the people who you're leading and managing. If I'm not prepared to do it myself, then there's a question over why are we doing it at all. So I think it's about empowering the staff that I have to do the best job that they possibly can. I think that's the key thing that I bring to any leadership role, and getting the best from them then to go forth and deliver better for the people of Northamptonshire.
Thank you very much. Okay, Mrs. Shields, or Nita, you're next.
Okay, Paul. My question is on the management and governance. What do you see as a current priority for the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner? And how will you seek to ensure that it delivers these effectively?
Okay, so for the last 6 years that I've worked for both PCCs, I've led on the fire and rescue integration for both PCCs, including leading on the business case, leading on the subsequent negotiations with the County Council, to the point where from the 1st of January Stephen becomes the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner. So fire, I suppose, is the number one priority I would see from a governance perspective. It's new, it's different. There are not that many models to follow. Stephen will only be the 4th Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner in the country, and therefore ensuring that the office is geared up for the additional scrutiny, challenge and governance function that it needs to perform as the Fire and Rescue Authority, I think is the number one priority for the next 6 months.
And how would you do that? How would you do that?
So I suppose the fact that I've worked alongside fire for 6 years means I already have a good understanding about what fire and rescue do and how they do it. We have processes and structures that we can, as much as possible, we're seeking to replicate what we've done for policing for fire. So things like corporate governance frameworks that we have produced for policing, we are replicating for fire as closely as we possibly can, so that we mirror effectively, so that both chiefs have, as close as we can get under legislation, the same responsibilities and the same accountability regime. That includes the accountability board processes, which will be mirrored so that effectively they will run back to back, so policing followed by fire. But actually that corporate governance framework will set out then how we oversee the fire and rescue service moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Ian, could you ask the next question, please? That is 4.
3.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, got confused. It's just because
Hello, Mr. Bullen.
Somebody left.
Okay, I have a question for you, sir. Happy to ask you this. How will you, as monitoring officer, seek to encourage the maintenance of high standards in the way that the Police and Crime Commissioner and the OPCC operate?
So partly through leadership style, I suppose, leading in a way that embodies some of that style in the first place. So actually living the words, I suppose, for want of a better expression, that we ensure that there's regular communication between me and the other statutory officer, so that actually we're really sure about our legal responsibilities, and that we are ensuring that we provide that advice to the PCC, so that we ensure that any decisions Stephen takes, he takes with the fullest information he possibly can to take them. And clearly, should there be a case where Stephen is overstepping where he can step, then that, you know, it's a funny role, isn't it, monitoring officer of an Office of Police and Crime Commissioner. It has the responsibility to inform the panel and others should it feel that the PCC is stepping beyond what they should. But I think Stephen knows we wouldn't put either of us forward if we were shrinking violets and were scared of doing such a thing. So I think that is that hopefully answers that question, Andre.
Thank you, Mr. Bullen. I'll ask you one related question, I think, in terms of this, and quite clearly you and I know that the fire service is very much a unionised service, and I know that the PCC is very much engaged positively in that agenda. And clearly, as monitoring officer, you'd have a significant strength in terms of any innovation, any changes, unlike the police, where they generally assume a different position. Fire are much more vocal in terms of their acceptance or not to any plans. How would you deal with that point?
So Stephen and I have already started the process, as I've been leading on fire anyway, we've already started the process of regular engagement with the unions from fire, FBU and others. We will continue to do that in the coming months. So it's about the openness and transparency, I suppose, that we provide to that with the FBU. We've been really clear with the FBU. I think that there will be times where Stephen, as the fire authority, will want to make change. But it's about communicating that at an early stage, it's about engaging at an early stage, and it's about that openness and transparency that we engender that means that we can take the FBU with us rather than getting into a confrontational situation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ian.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Bob, how will you go about working with the other directors sharing the position of Chief Executive to support the success of the new organisational model?
So as Stephen says, Nikki and I have worked directly together for the last 2 years. Since Nikki came into the office. But Nikki and I have known each other for a period before that as well in various roles. We've both been in public service in the county for well over a decade between us, each, I mean. So we already work closely together. We already communicate on a weekly basis in terms of making sure we're up to speed on where each other's at with various of our own initiatives. We're probably the two directors actually who've had the most crossover in terms of what we do, because we're probably the two who have spent more time, if you like, with the outward facing partnership relationships. Nikki and I both have relationships with the local authorities, both with health, etc. So we've already had to kind of find ways to make sure that we are joined up. Because the last thing we'd want is to go to any of those partnership forums and appear non-joined up. So we kind of already have that relationship. And actually, even since Stephen started this process, I think that's even been built on further in the last 4-6 weeks, where we are, if you like, even in more regular contact with each other to make sure that we are ensuring that we're of one voice rather than two.
Thank you. Anita, I think you can next.
Yes. Question 5, under the professional independence. Could you give an example of when you have needed to challenge someone at a senior level about a course of action that they were proposing, and how you went about doing this effectively?
So I'd use an example from the previous PCC's tenure, probably. So he was wishing to, at the time, to invest £1 million in working with the court service to reduce the backlog that Stephen's identified earlier today is still an issue today. But basically wanted to provide a £1 million grant, no strings attached, to try and clear some of that backlog with the courts. I, at the time, was in a director role in the office, and it was kind of my responsibility at that time to deliver on anything that the PCC wished to do. I kind of had the span of control that was anything that wasn't finance at the time. So it was coming towards the end of his tenure as well, which is the other context that's probably worth saying. It was probably 6 to 8 weeks before the election. So there was obviously other things he was doing at that time, which some of you may be aware of as well, which were ongoing in terms of selling Wootton Hall and the like. So I started by finding out the legalities of actually providing that grant, because I questioned whether it was legal to provide a grant from the Police and Crime Commissioner to Her Majesty's Courts and Tribunal Service. Took some legal advice, spoke with both legal from our perspective, but also from HMCTS's perspective, and got back the legal advice that actually it was not legal to do so. So I suppose I took it from an evidence-based perspective. So I don't tend to react when either this man to my right or the previous commissioner comes along with another idea on a day. I tend to go, okay, and then go away and find some evidence to either back up my kind of gut instinct that something may not be right or otherwise. So in that particular case, got the legal advice, was able then to effectively challenge back to the PCC with an evidence-based perspective that, one, it's not legal, and two, actually, 8 weeks before an election is due, is it morally right either to do so? And Stephen will know that there have been times when he and I have disagreed vehemently on things, and but I always come from kind of trying to find an evidence-based perspective, but also, if I can, find a solution that enables positive change to happen.
Thank you very much.
I'm not trying to sell Wootton Hall or give millions.
No, sorry, you're not in here at the moment, you're just listening. Winston, would you like to ask the next question, please?
Sorry, my question to you is, could you give an example of when you have identified and implemented an innovative solution to a significant problem or need, and how you sought to ensure that it was successful?
There's two probably that I'd like to mention. The first one, and some of you have been there this morning actually, so you've been to Warwick House this morning, you've seen Voice. So I led on the creation of Voice. I think it's fair to say when Stephen took over, it was delivered, statutory duty on PCCs to provide victim services. It was delivered via contract that was underperforming at the time. So myself and my team looked at alternative options to get better service delivery for the victims who need it in Northamptonshire. Came to Stephen with what was at the time, and it still is in fact, only the second time it's been done across the country, the model of effectively creating our own organisation to deliver that, rather than looking to outsource that to a third-party provider or insource it to the police, which is what some other PCCs have done. We ruled that option out because actually many victims, as you heard yourselves this morning, don't necessarily want to report to the police, so it was not right that we put that within a police service. But went down the line of creating our own organisation. As I say, only the second in the country again that did that, so not really a huge blueprint to follow. But what I did through that process was I'd engaged some, again, legal advice in terms of how to set up the company in a way that is legal, transparent, and to give it the best chance of success. Went about recruiting fairly early on, actually, the right leader for that organisation, so that we had the right leadership in place to drive that organisation forward. Had really detailed programme plan, so we had a really detailed approach to making sure that we covered off all the things you need to set up a new organisation or a new service, and tracked that on a weekly basis. So a robust kind of monitoring arrangement in place. So to set it up as a success, really, I suppose, it was that robust monitoring arrangement. It was getting the right advice from the right people at the right time, getting in the right resources, and giving, I suppose, the right equipment to do the job. Pleased to say today that Voice is in a much better place than it was 2 years ago. Victims now are getting a response. In 98% of cases, they get a response within 24 hours from Voice. It was down in the 60s under the previous contract arrangements. The other example I'd like to give is one that I'm really passionate and proud about, is the mental health treatment requirements for women, which is something that is ongoing at the moment. That is basically an option at court for magistrates or judges to sentence a woman who comes before them to a mental health treatment requirement. So in other words, getting treatment for their mental health needs, rather than an alternative that in many cases is custody and all the impacts that custody has on both the individual but their families as well. So this is something that's barely happened anywhere in the country. It's been an option for sentencers for more than a decade, but if I said in Northamptonshire in the year before we started the project, there was 3 sentenced to it, male or female, and that was common across the country. In the year since we've had it set up, there's now been over 80 women sentenced to mental health treatment requirements, and that's saving not only custody time, prison time, it's also getting better outcomes for the women, because actually their reoffending rates are incredibly low. Compliance rates with the actual sentence are really high. How I went about doing that was, it was again my leadership, I suppose, but it's bringing together the right organisations in that case. So clearly that involves the probation service, it involves the court service, but it also involves health services to provide the treatment, and importantly, the third sector, C2C and the Good Loaf, to provide that wraparound, if you like, social care that goes alongside that as a service. So I suppose in the same way that the PCC has convening powers, I suppose the Office of PCC has some of those convening powers, and so with a small amount of money and a will to get the right people around the table, it's attracted more money from all those other partners, and collectively, I still chair the steering group now. As I say, it's now had an impact on over 80 women's lives in the last year, who probably in many cases would have been sentenced to prison for a short term, which would have had impacts on their wider family. But importantly, they're actually getting help with their mental health issues. And you've only got to go up to the Good Loaf and meet some of the women there themselves. They have completely turned their lives around, and I suppose that's something I'm incredibly proud of, because it's something real and tangible, and you can feel and touch the difference it's made.
Thanks very much, Paul. Laura.
Right. Hi. My question is around partnership working. What is your approach to building and maintaining productive relationships with partner organizations, particularly in connection with sensitive or contentious matters, in order to achieve effective outcomes?
So I've spent the best part of 15 years in public service, most of those in Northamptonshire. And all the time I've been in Northamptonshire, my roles have been heavily about partnership working. So I previously worked at the County Council some 10 years plus ago, and in a role that was about bringing together partners, both in terms of all the services within the County Council, but partners, agencies across the county as well. Worked for the police in a similar partnership role, and then have gone on to work for the Police Authority and PCC for the last 6 years, as I say. So in all those roles, it's been about bringing partners together. I think the MHTR mental health treatment requirement example I just used shows how I go about bringing them together. I suppose some of it's about personal authenticity in partnership working, so actually building trusted relationships with people, and the fact that I've now been around this county at that length of time means that there are few senior execs in few organisations who I've not come across and worked with before. And so having that ability to work with them at that level is incredibly helpful, I think. There was a second part of the question that I don't feel like I've answered.
The second part was with partnering organisation, particularly in connection with sensitive or contentious matters.
Okay.
In order to achieve an outcome.
Okay. Fire is a really good example of that, because clearly some of what we agreed in terms of fire was with a previous administration and previous officers. So we, through that process, we've had to effectively not completely start from scratch again on some issues, but some contentious issues around what buildings should transfer and what monies should transfer hands to help facilitate the governance transfer. So I guess, again, the approach there has been, again, open, honest, transparent communications, regular communications with the right people at the County Council, explaining from a position of evidence why we're proposing a certain course of action, but being willing to listen to the views of the partner as well, because actually you get nothing done if it's too bullish in the way you approach things. So I think, as I say, the fire stuff is probably a really good example of how we've had to, as I say, not start from scratch, because some principles were there, but some things we've had to rework somewhat, just because the corporate memory at the county's end has not been there when we've then gone through the fine details, if you like. Hopefully that's answered your question.
Ian, would you like to?
Yes, thank you. What part can the police and crime panels play in supporting your role?
I think as we go forward, clearly you probably had less exposure to me than you've had to some of my other colleagues. You probably clearly know Martin as Chief Exec more so. I think, again, it's about building a working relationship to start with between ourselves. I think having that open dialogue, so that if there are things that I feel that are slightly concerning, that I need to have that conversation with you at an early stage. And I think it's equally important that if there are things that are concerning you as a panel, that you come back to me and Nikki, and that you are we have that flow of information both ways, so that if there is something that's concerning you, we can seek to address that either through a formal panel or through one of their workshop or experience type day sessions that as we go forward. So two-way information flow, I think, is the big thing.
Thank you. And finally, what will represent success in your role?
So as you know, it's kind of on a 6-month rotation basis. So I think the key thing for me in the first 6 months is that we get fire to a place where it feels as embedded and as governed in a way that policing currently does for us. So I think that's going to be the key focus of my attention in the first 6 months. I think success more generally for us on this will be about continuing to deliver, in fact, increasing the ability to deliver and speed of decision making for us as we move forward. So, as Stephen says, taking out that layer should mean that Nikki and I and Paul and Helen can bring forward ideas at an even greater pace than we've perhaps been able to through not having that additional layer. So I would see speed of decision making and speed of action as being a success criteria as well. But as I say, in terms of that first 6-month period, it's definitely about fire, governance and accountability, and getting those processes and performance frameworks up and running.
Thank you very much. Well, you'll be pleased to know that that's the end of your questions. Cheryl, are you going? Are you? I just wondered whether you could tell, or could you tell Nikki to come in?
Okay. Has the candidate got any questions?
Oh, sorry. Have you got any questions? It's fresh. I beg your pardon. I'm so eager.
No, thank you. I'm fine, thank you.
Okay. Okay. Did you want to say? Yeah. Right. So, thank you very much, and we will now interview the other second candidate. Yeah. 5, 2, 7. Are you going, Mrs. Shields?
No.
Oh, okay. Yes, I know, yeah. 3, 4,
Getting very close to not
5.
being correct.
We're okay for a minute. Mrs. Shields is coming back. Well, can you hold on? Yeah, Mary's got to go.
Sorry?
Yes.
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 Yes, we need 5 panel members present to be quorate, I'm afraid, Chairman.
Yes, I know, that's why we're just making sure. 1, 2, 3. Mrs. Shields is coming back. 4, 5.
I can open the other door from Mary's.
Is that 5 panel members, including the chair?
Yes, 5 panel members
So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah,
Anita's still
if
here.
you can hang on a bit, I think you'll probably
Because
be...
I've got a mayor on duty at 7.
No, you'll be okay. We'll
Yeah.
be done well before
Yeah.
that. Yeah. Yeah, we shouldn't be too
Yeah,
long.
but I've got to get back to...
Yeah, I
as
know.
well, so.
Yeah. We've only been about quarter or 20 minutes, haven't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so Mrs. Shields, who said she was just going to...
check on Mary if you actually get out.
No.
No.
Sorry, Councillor. Stuart's showing you around.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, he knows his way around, doesn't he?
Yeah, Mrs. Shields back. Come on. Right, we now have our quoracy. Sorry you've had to wait, Nikki, and I will kick off with the first question. Sorry, it's a little bit noisy for a sec. Okay. How do you describe your approach to leadership and management, and how will you go about applying it in this role?
I would say, and I think most people who have only worked with and for me would say, I have a very open and enabling style of leadership and management, that I am very, very supportive of the people I work with and who work for me. I value the expertise that actually sits lower down in organisations as well as at a strategic level, and that I encourage a culture of innovation, creativity, and I'm really receptive to people actually thinking about how to do things differently. Having said that, I also recognise the importance of performance management. I am prepared to challenge people whether there are issues of poor performance, and have on occasions taken people through unfortunate processes that have resulted in outcomes where they've either ended up with disciplinary action or leaving the organisation as a result. So for me there is very much that balance. Actually, as far as possible, you seek to be enabling and taking people with you, but actually you do have to counter that by making sure that you hold people to account where appropriate.
Thank you very much. Okay, Anita.
My question to you, Nikki, is on the management and governance. What do you see as the current priorities for the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner? And how will you see to ensure that it delivers these effectively?
Okay, I mean, in terms of direct office priorities, there are obviously priorities around making sure that the police force side of the business demonstrates improvement, as we've obviously got issues there in terms of current inspection reports. We do have priorities around the integration of fire and making sure that that is a smooth process, that all of the relevant staff are brought on board in an effective way, that we manage the systems and processes. We obviously, Stephen's previously alluded to the need to have the project around enabling services. I think there's also a key priority generally within the county about making sure that, you know, we are working with our partners around moving towards unitary structures, that we ensure that there are ways in which we are able to influence those, not necessarily in terms of shape of structures, but actually what that looks like in terms of how we work together, how we make sure that two new authorities can complement the work of organisations that need to be done at a county level. And I think very much along the lines of partnership working as well, because recognising the fact that actually demand on all services that deal with issues of high risk and need, and the police being one, is actually very much outside of their own influence. So if you're talking about the pressures that are put on policing demand through mental health issues, crisis care type issues, those sorts of things. We very much need to be working collectively with partners to make sure that what we're actually doing is intervening at appropriate points, wherever they may be, to make sure that we use make best use of all public services appropriately.
Andre, would you like to ask?
Thank you, Chair. I will. Ms Mardek, I have a question which is, how will you as monitoring officer seek to encourage the maintenance of high standards in the way that the Police and Crime Commissioner and the OPCC operates?
Okay, I mean, I've actually got considerable experience in previous roles of fulfilling the functions of the monitoring officer. I was head of democratic services at Coventry. I ran 2 improvement programmes concurrently at Lincolnshire County Council. One focused around constitutional review and effective governance, and the other actually focused around member and senior officer. I'm sorry, but I've got to get on to your question.
No, it's not that. It's the real. No, won't be court because Ian's going to go as well. Can you hang on? We're okay. All right.
Requirements are met. Following financial procedure rules, ensuring the effective implementation of schemes of delegation, constitutional procedures, and all of those sorts of things. So from that perspective, I have considerable previous experience of making sure that decisions and the functioning of organisations are compliant with a range of processes that make them legally compliant, shall we say. So yes, I mean, I've also got experience of other. I was also previously qualified as a company secretary, so I'm used to complying with companies law, and actually acted as company secretary for a number of arm's length management organisations as well, the City Council. So I wouldn't necessarily see that as being a problem. I think the biggest issue really is to make sure that you have a really good oversight of what's coming through the system, that you're aware of what your strategic priorities are, what your decisions are going to be, and making sure that actually you think through the process of what that means. Because quite often, in terms of being compliant, there are lead times associated with that. And if you actually don't apply some degree of project planning to how you oversee that, that's where you are most at risk of falling foul of the processes.
Thank you.
Just to follow on then, Chair, just to keep it balanced, multi-talented clearly. May I ask you in terms of the environment clearly with fire, it's very much a unionised environment as we know, and unlike the police force, it has quite a vocal strength there. How would you tackle those issues? And I appreciate it's non-operational, but it's clearly strategic.
I think it's very much about working with the service and working with the unions. And actually, I mean, there will be points at which you will never agree, but actually it's about having a rationale to what you're proposing to do, and at least being able to explain that in a way that they might not accept, but can understand. I've also previously ran school consultation processes for school closures, and again, in that sort of situation, what you're explaining is something that very much people don't want to hear, but actually ultimately it's something that has to be delivered. So it's about making best use of relationships and understanding that actually by engaging people, and particularly engaging them as early as possible in the process, so that they feel that they are at least not just being consulted, but actually have an opportunity to shape what you might be proposing to do. Because the more you actually engage people in that process, the more likely they are to come on board in a way that ultimately they will accept.
Thank you.
Ian.
Thank you. How will you go about working with the other directors sharing the position of Chief Executive to support the success of the new organisational model of the OPC?
I think as a director team, we already work together well. We have quite a lot of cross-cutting areas between our portfolios that require us to work together anyway. So in terms of strategic development of what we as an OPCC are looking to deliver, we would look to do that collectively. I think in terms of this role, particularly in terms of how, for example, Paul and I would work together, I think there does have to be quite a lot of close collaboration, because effectively you are, to all intents and purposes, sharing the function, and a bit like a job share type arrangement, you need to make sure that there are appropriate handovers, that you are briefing each other on what you're doing, and because ultimately what you need, whilst the role is being shared, is a consistency of approach. I think it's also very important that although the other board is not actually at this point in time taking on the responsibility, he actually oversees the staff predominantly involved in the governance of the organisation. So actually that automatically means you have to expand the working together arrangement to take that on board. But I mean, effectively, as a management team, we need to be managing the business of the office and the organisation. It's not, in this situation, something that one individual takes forward. At any point in time, you may have responsibility for certain functions, but actually the effective management of the organisation as a whole is the responsibility of the management team.
Okay. Vicky, could you give me an example of when you've needed to challenge someone at a senior level about a course of action that they were proposing and how you went about doing this effectively?
I'll probably done a few. I had a very interesting challenge at Coventry with pretty much the whole cabinet around their proposal to invest in the development of the Rico Arena, and the fact that actually, as predominantly season ticket holders of Coventry City Football Club, they did actually require a dispensation from the Secretary of State if they were to make any decisions in relation to said investment. Unfortunately, they didn't necessarily agree with that point of view and felt that they could do that without, because in their eyes, most of the City of Coventry supported Coventry City Football Club, and therefore they weren't in any way different from the general population. So we had some quite interesting debates about that. We did ultimately end up in a situation where they did apply for and were granted dispensations to make the decisions, but unfortunately the leader of the council, when it came to the day of making the decisions, did actually decide to make his feelings known by turning up to make the decision in his football shirt. And I mean, there have been other ones. I mean, for example, at Lincolnshire, we had a situation where the Education Department sought legal advice on the council's investment in places at Stanford Endowed Independent School. And the council had for a number of years paid for places at the school because there was no grammar school in Stanford. Now, the legal advice said that that's actually illegal and that the council shouldn't be doing it, but obviously the withdrawal of that scheme was incredibly politically sensitive. And what I actually managed to negotiate was that we would close the scheme, but that its withdrawal would be staggered, so that anybody who was currently at a place funded by the council would continue in that place until they left school. Thereafter, there'd be no new places associated with it. And then, in terms of challenging individuals, doing behaviour and cultural change for senior officers and members meant quite a lot of challenges, unfortunately, that ranged from, you know, what constituted bullying behaviour through to the appropriateness of use of council IT equipment.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Winston, would you like to ask the next question?
Yes. My question to you is, what is your approach?
Sorry, you're on number 6. Sorry.
It's been a long day. I'm still at the road, actually. Could you give an example of when you have identified and implemented an innovative solution to a significant problem or need, and how you sought to ensure that it was successful?
Sorry.
Could you give an example of when you have identified and implemented an innovative solution to a significant problem or need, and how you sought to ensure that it was successful?
Okay. I think one example would be, again, when I was at Lincolnshire, we had a significant issue with foster care placements, in that very much we were held to ransom effectively by a lot of the local private providers, because actually what we were paying as a local authority to our foster carers was significantly lower than what the private organisations were paying to theirs. And actually with a lot of very contentious negotiation with the Social Services Department, what I actually led was a scheme whereby we were able to significantly increase our in-house foster care allowances through disinvestment in out-of-county placements, which the Social Care Department initially were absolutely up in arms about, because you can't possibly change anybody's placement ever, even though what you might be changing it from and to is actually better for the individual, but stability was the key aim at the time. But actually what we actually managed to calculate was that we could implement the increase and significantly run a massive recruitment drive, and that would be funded by a reduction of 6 out-of-county placements per year. So actually for very little disruption to the overall children in residential care system, that we did actually massively improve our offer to children in the care system in the county.
Thank you very much. Laura?
Good. You partially or mostly answered it earlier on anyway, but my question is around partnership working. What is your approach to building and maintaining productive relationships with partner organizations, particularly in connection with sensitive or contentious matters, in order to achieve effective outcomes?
I'm currently a member of the Children's and Adults Safeguarding Boards. I deputise for Stephen on the Health and Wellbeing Board. I'm a member of the YOS Management Board, and I have also just recently led the reinstatement of a County Community Safety Board. And I've previously sat on the majority of those functions in a partnership director role, while I was at Northampton Borough Council as well. So I've got quite significant experience of operating in a partnership environment. When I was previously a member of the Children and Young People's Partnership Board, I led the executive group that managed the business on behalf of the board, and I also, on behalf of NCC, managed the partnership pool budget. And also as a partnership director, I led the establishment of the Safe Northampton co-located police and local authority office, which housed co-located and matrix managed ASB, licensing, hate crime and community safety teams. So I've got quite a lot of experience of actually working in a partnership environment, and because my range of participation is so broad, I actually am in a position where I am able to understand the perspectives of different partnerships. So for example, have previously had to quite significantly challenge partnership boards as an entity about their ownership of certain things. So for example, particularly going back to the days of local area agreement targets and things like that, multiple partnerships would seek to own the same indicators, which actually created an awful lot of crossover about what people were doing. That's not, and it was about trying to get people to understand that actually, generally speaking, you will have one organisation that is the logical lead owner of any one given indicator, but others may contribute to the delivery of that, and just getting that balance, particularly difficult around children's and community safety, because they very much both wanted to own them. Part of that, I think, was around, if I'm going to be honest, around the fact that the police didn't trust anybody else to deliver and wanted to own everything. And there were really strong elements of that. Equally, from a social care perspective, quite often a view that actually they were the only ones who could possibly have any involvement in protecting children. So just about actually challenging people and their ways of working. At the moment, very much in my director role, my focus is around early intervention and prevention. And actually there are some real challenges around that in terms of trying to get people to understand that, firstly, investment in prevention will reduce demand. It's very difficult to prove, very difficult to necessarily have reams and reams of statistics that demonstrate it, but anecdotally we all know it to be true, and therefore actually we should be doing it. But there is also that issue very much around early intervention and prevention, that the organisation that funds the preventative activity is not necessarily the recipient of the saving that it actually creates. And that, so a lot of actual negotiation around trying to persuade people that yes, okay, you need to invest in something, it will have a benefit, you might not be the recipient directly of the saving in one regard, but actually further down the line you probably will.
Thank you very much. Ian.
Okay. I recognising the role of the panel in terms of providing a critical challenge perhaps to PCC, I think there is perhaps that I would see very much an opportunity to have a similar constructively challenging relationship with you both as a panel and as individuals. I think there is also something about using your knowledge and expertise in relation to this role and your roles within your respective organisations in terms of helping to support the development of the work that we might be doing, and not just retrospectively perhaps overviewing or sanctioning it. You are all actually our partners, and from that point of view, bearing in mind the partnership working element, I think it's important that we perhaps look, and go back to, dare I say it, they've both gone, the domestic abuse conversation earlier. Actually, there are a lot of areas in which we do need to work together, and you know, I am at the moment assuming the responsibility for the strategic lead in relation to domestic abuse in the county, but actually the role that policing can have in terms of doing anything about that is incredibly limited, other than enforcing it when it all goes sadly very wrong. So in terms of what we actually do collectively in relation to that agenda is something that actually we would all need to think about, and I think there's value in drawing on your expertise in that situation. I think there is also something about being ambassadors for what we do, both within your organisations but actually also within the community, because public perception around matters relating to policing is actually one of the biggest challenges. And actually it doesn't matter what we do about that, unless we go for a kind of Gestapo type approach where people perceive there to be a policeman on every corner, we're probably never going to overcome that. But actually we do all have a role in positively promoting what we do, and making sure that actually where there are issues, those are brought back and we have the opportunity to address them at the earliest stage.
Thank you very much. Okay, finally, what will represent success in your role? Full marks.
But I also think, yes, there is that. I think there is also something around very good relationships with the services that deliver that, those that are within our direct control. So good relationships with Chief Constable, with the Chief Fire Officer, with those services, and actually a good and strong office generally in terms of that management function as well.
Thank you very much. Okay, would you want to turn this? Have you got any questions for us? Okay. Sorry, we now need to turn the camera off.
Yes.